Hey guys, tonight we're going deep into the heart of ancient Babylon, one of the most powerful cities the world has ever known. You'll walk through its sun-baked streets, past the towering ziggurats, and feel the heavy scent of incense drifting through the air. You'll also, unfortunately, come face to face with some of the strangest and most unsettling sexual customs ever recorded in the ancient world. You probably won't survive this, emotionally, but don't worry, no one ever really does. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not trying to guilt you, just trying to survive the algorithm, you know? Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm curious who else is wandering through this ancient madness with us. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that, soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice when you step into Babylon is how incredibly organized everything looks. The streets are wide, clean, and buzzing with commerce. Clay bricks beneath your sandals radiate the leftover heat from the day, and gold shimmers faintly on distant towers. But the real centre of attention isn't the bustling markets, or even the looming, multi-layered ziggurat. It's that temple over there, the one dedicated to Ishtar, goddess of love, war, and, well, other forms of passion. Let's call it what it is, the Temple of Trouble. As you inch closer, drawn by music and the shimmer of lanterns, the reality of this place begins to sink in. It's not just a temple, it's an institution, a machine fueled by divine commandments, royal endorsements, and the steady offering of bodies. Every year, thousands of women pass through these doors, many only once in their lives, and not to pray exactly. You walk past long lines of young women, each dressed in gauzy robes, waiting stunnedly at the temple gates. Some hold flowers, some look nervous, others look resigned. And you're just trying not to make eye contact. That never goes well in places like this. Now, here's a historical fact that's going to mess with your brain. According to some ancient Greek sources, the Babylonians themselves didn't exactly keep Yelp reviews on this. The practice of sacred prostitution required every woman in Babylon to offer herself to a stranger at least once in her life, as an offering to Ishtar. Doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, married, single, young, old, every woman. 1 silver coin, 1 anonymous act, and then you were considered spiritually clean. You spot a priest in brilliant white robes moving down the line. He's selecting women based on some criteria you definitely don't understand. You're trying not to stare, but then the music shifts. Flutes, slow drums, someone burns something sweet and smoky, and the doors open. Inside, the air changes completely. Thick, warm, perfumed. If jasmine and cinnamon ever had a love child, it would smell like this. There are corridors wrapped in sheer curtains, and the flickering oil lamps cast shadows that flirt with your peripheral vision. You aren't even sure if this is real or some fever dream woven together with incense smoke and poor life decisions. A young acolyte motions for you to follow. You do, because apparently saying no to a divine invitation isn't really a thing here. Your guide doesn't speak, just gestures, and leads you to a softly lit room with cushions and more curtains. You hear distant laughter. A door opens and closes, and then you're alone. This might be a good time to mention that scholars still debate whether sacred prostitution was ever really practiced the way Herodotus claimed. Some say it was a ritual misinterpreted by outsiders. Others say it was exaggerated, distorted through cultural bias. But the temple exists, the legends persist, and you're here, in the heart of it, trying not to sneeze from all the damn incense. There's a carved plaque on the wall showing Ishtar, bare-breasted, wings flared, foot planted on the back of a lion. She's not a goddess who asks, she demands. And from the way people treat this place, no one dares question her. You sit, you wait, time stretches. Eventually someone enters. You don't look. That's part of the rule here. Anonymity is sacred. You hear the rustle of cloth. A soft voice whispers a prayer to Ishtar. And then the ritual begins. It's not romantic, it's not tender, it's not horrific either. Just clinical, disconnected. Like two people moving through motions prescribed by centuries of belief and societal pressure. It's a transaction. 1 silver coin changes hands. 1 prayer is whispered again, and it's over. You walk out into the night air, blinking, confused. No one looks at you, no one speaks. Just more women in line, more acolytes moving like shadows, more smoke climbing up into the stars, and you realise that in Babylon, this isn't horrifying. It's normal. A quirky fact? Some legends claimed Ishtar would curse any woman who refused the ritual with infertility or endless bad luck in love, which, when you think about it, is one hell of a divine guilt trip. You leave the temple grounds and find a bench near the river, staring at the reflections, and you start to wonder, if no one questions a thing for long enough, does it stop being weird, or does everyone just get better at pretending? The night air is still thick with the scent of burnt myrrh and human sweat as you sit by the river, trying to unpack what just happened. There's no one to talk to, at least not anyone who'd think it was strange. In Babylon, this is just religion. That's the part that keeps catching in your brain like a splinter. No shame, no secrecy. What you just did back in the temple wasn't just allowed, it was expected, holy even. You participated in something people have been doing for centuries under the gaze of Ishtar herself. Congrats, but you don't have much time to dwell. A temple bell rings into the distance, long, slow, and low, and the street begins to change around you. Robes shuffle, people emerge from behind high stone walls, candles flicker into life along the road to the inner sanctuary, and you, because you have terrible instincts and even worse timing, decide to follow. The deeper you go, the more intense everything becomes. Gone is the faint reverence of the outer temple. Here in the inner compound it's different, louder, stranger. At the top of the marble steps waits another doorway, massive, flanked by two statues of lions with human eyes. They stare at you like they know something you don't. Inside it's darker, just slits of moonlight falling through high vents in the ceiling, like the place itself is being fed soft moonbeams instead of air. The walls shimmer faintly with embedded lapis lazuli catching silver light. A soft voice welcomes you. It's not a priest this time, but a priestess, her face painted with stars and her voice slow like honey, left in the sun. She tells you the ritual is about to begin, and you are lucky, so lucky, to witness the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage of Ishtar and her divine consort. You don't fully understand what that means yet, but when has that ever stopped anyone in Babylon? You're handed a small cup filled with a bitter red wine laced with something electric. It leaves your tongue tingling. You drink it, of course. Peer pressure's a thing even in 1750 BCE. You're led down a hall of white curtains, each embroidered with gold thread forming spirals, suns, and, peculiarly, rows of open eyes. Behind the final veil, there they are, the high priestess and her chosen partner, dressed as Ishtar and Dumuzi. They sit on a raised platform, surrounded by bowls of rose petals and burning spices. He looks uncomfortable. She does not. This is not a private affair, this is performance. Around them, nobles, clergy, and temple patrons sit cross-legged in respectful silence, watching as the divine pair reenact the marriage of heaven and earth. And yes, it is exactly what you think. They don't stop for modesty. There are no curtains. This is Babylon, baby. Here's your historical fact. Every year during the spring equinox, Babylonian temples held the Hieros Gamos, where the king or a high-ranking figure symbolically mated with the goddess through a high priestess. It was thought to bring fertility to the land, prosperity to the city, and ensure the gods didn't smite everyone with a sandstorm or worse. The wine kicks in. You feel lighter, floaty. Your brain tries to panic, but your body's like, nah, let's just vibe with the rose petals. The priestess moans in rhythm with the drums. The audience watches without flinching. Some begin to chant, others close their eyes and sway. You've never felt more like an outsider, and yet somehow complicit. And now here's the fringe theory. Some modern scholars suggest this entire ritual may have been largely symbolic, with no actual intercourse involved. Just elaborate pageantry. Others argue, not so gently, that oh no, it was very real, and possibly the core ritual of Babylonian temple life. It's one of those debates that keeps ancient historians fighting in academic forums and awkwardly dodging questions at dinner parties. But back to you. You're sitting on the floor of a holy room, surrounded by men and women who think you're witnessing divine union, and you're just trying to figure out if your wine was laced with datura or just some extremely niche Sumerian root herb. The chanting rises. You get a whiff of something pungent, maybe opium, maybe just more burning myrrh, and then the room sort of blurs, and then it stops, just like that. The priestess stands. Her partner bows his head. The ritual is over, the spell broken, the trance fading. You're ushered back out into the hallway, blinking under torchlight. Everyone is silent. No clapping, no cheers, only reverence. Even now it feels like you've stumbled into something massive, something you don't fully understand, like watching someone else's god in the act of creation. You pass a wall painting on the way out, Ishtar descending into the underworld. Her clothing falls away piece by piece with each level she passes. You remember someone once told you the myth was a metaphor for surrender, for sacrifice. Maybe that's all of this is. Maybe that's how people made sense of things they couldn't control: famine, drought, fertility, death. Maybe the only way to feel safe was to make your body the bridge between human fear and divine chaos. Or maybe they were just really, really into weird public theatre. As you step outside, the sun's already threatening the horizon. Babylon is waking. Vendors roll out carts. Slaves carry jugs of water. Pigeons coo from temple ledges. And no one, not one person, looks surprised at what happened last night. For them, it's just the divine order of things. You, though, you're going to need another drink. The sun crawls up over the horizon, and you realize you haven't slept. Not that sleep feels like a thing people do in Babylon. This city pulses with energy that never dies down, like it's always on the edge of another ritual, another decree, another public spectacle. You're not even sure what day it is anymore. But you do know one thing: you're due for a breather, so naturally you wander into another existential nightmare. It starts off innocent enough. You're walking through the Ishtar Gate district, passing street hawkers yelling over each other about figs, goats, and miracle ointments. Someone tries to sell you a carved fertility idol with very ambitious proportion. You decline, barely. Then you reach a wide plaza that smells faintly of smoke and stale perfume, and you see them. Women, lined up under a covered stone archway, quiet, waiting. Not dressed as priestesses this time. These are regular women, old, young, tall, awkward, confident. No fanfare, no flowers, just a line. And a man at the far end holding a scroll and a measuring rod. You think, okay, maybe it's a census, a head count, a legal proceeding. It is none of those things. It's the one-coin rule, and you're now watching it unfold in the very literal sense. A grizzled old merchant, smelling like goat milk and triumph, approaches the front of the line. A woman steps forward. They exchange words you can't hear. Then she kneels, touches her forehead to the dusty ground, and follows him into a shaded stall behind the platform. She'll return shortly with a single silver coin in hand. Her obligation to Ishtar fulfilled. You glance around to see if anyone else looks appalled. They don't. In fact, a small crowd has gathered to observe the line, like it's a casual afternoon market attraction. A woman in a red veil even brings her child to watch. The kid claps when the next woman is chosen. You want to scream. Here's your historical fact of the night, or morning now, technically. According to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, this ritual was mandatory. Every woman in Babylon was required, at least once in her life, to sit in the temple district and offer herself to a stranger in Ishtar's name. She couldn't go home until it happened, until the silver coin was dropped in her lap, one time only, and then she'd never have to do it again. A holy transaction. Now, modern scholars are, let's say, deeply split on this one. Some argue that Herodotus exaggerated or misinterpreted a more symbolic or optional rite. Others believe the practice was very real, but maybe not as widespread or systematic as he claimed. There's no Babylonian law code that confirms it, no temple records outlining quotas, but oral tradition and foreign accounts kept the story alive, and that's enough to make it part of the mythos. Quirky fact: in some interpretations, the silver coin wasn't just payment. It was considered a sacred offering to the goddess herself. Meaning technically, the man was just the delivery system, romantic war, right? You stay in the shadows and watch as the line shuffles forward. Some women look embarrassed, others bored. A few seem oddly empowered by it, like they're reclaiming something. Maybe they are. You wouldn't dare ask. One girl can't be more than 16. She looks pale, clenched. She tries to hide her trembling hands under her shawl. The man who chooses her is at least 50, bald with yellow teeth and a belly that shifts like wet laundry when he walks. She follows him. She does not come back. That's when the priest on the platform calls out something in a clear, sharp voice. Everyone pauses. The crowd murmurs. Then they all turn to you. Apparently you've been standing too long, looking too curious. You're waved forward. You do what you always do in Babylon. Try not to panic while complying politely. You approach the platform and murmur the words you've been practicing. You say you're not from here, not initiated. You say you're just watching. A pilgrim? Maybe. A tourist? The priest raises an eyebrow. He says, Ishtar does not overlook any heart. You say, totally, love that. He waves you off mercifully, and you slink back into the side streets, your heart racing. For a second there, you nearly became part of the line. You stop at a stall and buy something to eat. Dates stuffed with honey and crushed almonds. They taste like guilt, but they're still delicious. Welcome to Babylon. As you sit chewing and watching a lizard crawl across a stone wall, you think about how many women have sat on that same stone waiting for a coin that would buy them a piece of spiritual peace. You think about how powerful belief can be. Powerful enough to turn a sacred obligation into a public performance. Powerful enough to make shame a holy thing. And maybe that's what makes Babylon so hard to grasp. It's not that people are twisted or cruel. It's that the city wraps the divine around every part of life. Birth, death, love, sex, power. Until you can't tell where God ends and humanity begins. Until people start doing unspeakable things and calling it holy. You finish your snack and look up. The crowd's gone. The women have disappeared into their own lives. The stone archway is just a stone archway again, and the city moves on like it always does. You, though, you carry it now. That image, that line, that ancient rule. One woman. One time, one coin, and all the gods watching, you're walking again. Babylon doesn't really let you stop for long. The heat's picking up, and your feet ache from dodging carts and ceremonial parades. Yes, parades. Apparently today's a feast day. Again. This place has more holidays than actual work days, and they all seem to involve a lot of drums, flowers, sweating oxen, and unsettling facial expressions. You follow a string of priests chanting in Sumerian as they carry garlands of reeds and a gilded idol that looks suspiciously like it might need therapy. The crowd parts to let them pass, eyes low, hands clasped. You're just trying to stay close enough to look like you belong, but not so close that someone thinks you want to participate. Eventually the parade leads you back, of course, to the temple district, and you realise you're back at the very edge of Ishtar's compound again. But this time, instead of the main entrance, you notice a small curved doorway off to the side, half hidden behind hanging sheets of dyed linen. There's a steady stream of people slipping inside, all of them silent, carrying small bundles of something fragrant. Probably herbs or oil or animal bits. It looks secret, which naturally means you have to go. Inside it's dim and hushed. The air is sticky with incense. A stone corridor leads to a low-ceilinged chamber bathed in amber light. You see couches arranged in a circle, surrounded by hanging braziers. The scent of jasmine hits you hard again, but this time it's layered with something else, nervous sweat and musk. There's movement behind one of the gauzy curtains. You squint and immediately regret it. Yep, people, doing things. This isn't the one-time offering ritual. This is different. It's more recreational, but still very much in the name of the goddess. You ease yourself onto a bench near the wall and try to look like you're contemplating spiritual mysteries, not judging everything around you. And then you hear it. A voice, low and rhythmic, reciting a prayer in Sumerian. Not just a prayer, an invitation. A woman, covered in golden bangles and barely anything else, moves between the couches, offering each visitor a few drops of perfumed oil. She anoints your forehead, mutters a blessing from Ishtar, and then asks you, point blank, if you'd like to join in the ritual of renewal. You decline, as politely as you can with someone's thigh brushing your elbow. She nods, understanding. Consent at least seems to matter here. A small win in a very strange setting. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian temples often had ritual chambers for what scholars sometimes call communal devotion. These weren't necessarily orgies in the modern sense, though some clearly were, but rather acts of shared intimacy believed to bond worshippers more closely with the divine. Ishtar, after all, was not just the goddess of love, but of war and chaos too, pleasure and destruction hand in hand. You take in the room, the slow, dreamlike movements of the participants, the swaying veils, the flicker of candlelight on oiled skin, and suddenly you're aware of how carefully choreographed it all is. This isn't a pile of debauchery. It's a performance, a sacred play with expected roles, careful pacing and symbolic gestures. And yet it's also entirely real. The line between ritual and experience is blurrier here than it ever should be. A quirky detail you notice? In the corner of the room sits a man playing a double-pipe flute, blindfolded, just playing. Steady, hypnotic music. No one seems to know why. Maybe he's there for atmosphere. Maybe he's been playing that same melody for hours, maybe days. You can't stop wondering if he wants to be here or if he lost a bet with the priesthood. You slip out after a while, careful not to draw attention. Back in the sunlight, the world feels too loud, too fast. You need something, anything, to shake the images from your mind. You head toward the market square, where the noise of merchants shouting over each other and children chasing goats brings you back to reality, sort of. As you rest near a pillar and sip from a cup of barley beer, a passing local plops down beside you. His teeth are crooked, and his tunic looks like it hasn't seen water since last spring. He smiles. "You've been to the oil chamber, haven't you?" he says in a low, scratchy voice. You nod slowly. "Don't worry," he chuckles. "First time always feels like the gods reached inside your ribs and jiggled things around. Not the most comforting image, but weirdly accurate." "Me? I go once a week. Keeps me young." He winks. Then offers you a pickle from a greasy pouch. You politely decline. As he wanders off, you find yourself oddly grateful for that brief flash of grounded humanity. Just a tired man with body odour and a pickle pouch trying to survive this divine circus like everyone else. Here's where scholars get stuck again. There's an ongoing debate about how much of this was actually enforced religion versus cultural norm. Some experts think these rituals were only for the elite or clergy, exclusive, scripted, symbolic. Others argue they were far more widespread, integrated into daily life in a way that blurred sacred and profane into one inescapable system of control. You at this point are leaning toward the latter, because nothing in this city feels like a choice. Every action, every ritual, even every whispered blessing seems wrapped in the explanations of 1,000 years of tradition and pressure, and beneath it all, a quiet hum of fear of what happens if you don't participate. By now, the sun is low again, and the city has shifted into evening mode. Fires are lit, musicians begin to play on rooftops. A group of young men and women dance in a circle around a jar of wine, chanting praises to Ishtar and giggling whenever someone slips. You pause to watch, just for a moment. It's easy to forget, in the middle of all the madness, that there's beauty here too. The kind that sneaks in when no one's looking. Still, your mind won't let go of the oil chamber. Of the way people surrendered so easily, joyfully. Ritual or not, it was real for them, and maybe that's the most disturbing thing of all. Evening in Babylon hums like a swarm of bees wrapped in velvet. The colours of the sky turn from molten bronze to dusky lavender, and every surface, from the ziggurat walls to the market stalls, is bathed in soft, flickering torchlight. It's almost beautiful enough to make you forget that you're in the belly of one of history's strangest fever dreams. Almost. You're wandering again, because in Babylon there's no such thing as privacy or peace. Behind every corner is a ceremony, a chant, a goat covered in gold foil for reasons you've stopped questioning. You pass a group of boys carving clay tablets with messages to Ishtar, some of which are suspiciously detailed for their age. You stop long enough to realise that yes, even children learn early. Kyo, that the gods have needs, and those needs are everyone's business. But your feet carry you farther, drawn by music echoing through narrow corridors. You follow the sound to a place where the stone walls grow wider, cooler. The air shifts, less smoke, more damp. You've stumbled into the inner compound of the high priests. You shouldn't be here. A tall man in deep blue robes greets you at the gate, eyes rimmed with kohl and head shaved clean. He studies you with the kind of expression that says, "I know what you've seen," which is never what you want to hear in Babylon. But he steps aside, gesturing silently for you to enter, and so you do, like the human cautionary tale you've become. Inside it's cooler, quieter. The walls are etched with divine symbols, 8-pointed stars, coiled serpents, things that look vaguely anatomical and unsettlingly aroused. A hallway leads you to a chamber where a small group of priests lounges on velvet cushions, sipping wine from golden goblets and discussing dreams like they're trading stocks. You sit, uninvited but tolerated. One of the younger priests leans over and whispers, "New, aren't you? Don't worry, everyone comes through here eventually." You're starting to believe him. Here's your fact of the evening. Babylon's priesthood wasn't just a religious class, it was a power class. They controlled land, trade, and massive wealth. And yes, they were often heavily involved in sexual rituals, sometimes under the guise of spiritual purity, sometimes just because power and indulgence are a timeless combo. This chamber, though, this is where things get twisted. One of the senior priests, An older man with an unsettling grin and a beard that looks like it's been oiled by virgins starts to speak. "The goddess gives us power," he says, "and in her service we are never cold." The others nod like he's just said something profound instead of terrifying. You glance around and see something that stops you cold. A boy, not a man, not yet, sits quietly at the edge of the room, wearing the robe of an initiate. He doesn't speak, doesn't move, just waits. A priest gestures to him and the boy rises, walks to the centre of the room and begins a slow, practiced dance. Every motion is ritualistic, meaningful. At least, you hope that's what it is. Because the alternative, that's something you're not ready to consider. The priests watch, murmuring prayers, sipping their wine, their eyes gleaming in the lamplight. You try not to, but you watch too because you're still trying to understand, or you're still hoping this is all just metaphor. It's not. Here comes the historical debate. Scholars have long debated whether younger temple initiates, especially boys, were involved in temple rites of a sexual nature. Some texts suggest a third gender class of priests known as Gala or Asinnu, who may have been castrated or adopted feminine roles. Were they revered? Abused? Both. The truth is buried somewhere under millennia of crumbling stone and half-erased clay tablets. And while we're on that note, you might be wondering about eunuchs, and yes, they're very real here. You ask one of the priests about them, and he smiles. "Those who lose what they do not need become closer to the gods," he says. That's not comforting. You eventually gather that eunuchs often served as temple guards, attendants, and scribes, trusted precisely because they were considered pure and no longer sexually dangerous, as if mutilation magically removed ambition or desire. The logic here is flexible. You ask, casually, what happens to those who don't want to be eunuchs? The priest just smiles and sips his wine. Few resist, fewer survive it. Cool. That's when a horn sounds from somewhere above, signalling the end of the evening session. The priests rise, stretch, and file out like cats slinking back into the night. The boy bows once, steps behind a curtain, and vanishes. You follow a different exit, hoping it leads anywhere that isn't horrifying. It spits you out into a side alley paved with limestone and lined with tiny oil lamps. For a moment you think you're alone, and then a hand grabs your wrist. It's an old woman in faded robes, her face tattooed with concentric circles. She looks straight into you. "Don't go back there," she says. The goddess sees what they do, but she doesn't always bless it. Then she slips away before you can ask anything else. You stand there, the oil lamps flickering around you like a warning. And suddenly it all clicks. Babylon's sacred rituals, its temple orders, its divine pageantry, it's not just about gods or myths or harvest cycles. It's about control, about who gets to define purity, who's allowed to be powerful, who gets to be untouchable, and who gets touched until there's nothing left of them but silence. You finally make your way back to the river, exhausted, your thoughts tangled in 1,000 contradictions. You watch the dark water slide past like time itself. Impossible to hold. Somewhere deep in the temple district, the drums are starting up again. Because in Babylon, the show never ends. You wake up curled against a column near the river, unsure when sleep actually overtook you. The sun is barely up, casting pale light across the Euphrates. The water murmurs, pulling silkily past the docks, carrying whispers and prayers, secrets and shame. Somewhere far off, a conch shell moans, another morning ritual beginning. Another day of Babylon pretending it hasn't lost its mind. You stretch and wince, your back cracks. Your neck feels like it was used as a drum during one of Ishtar's parties. And just when you're deciding to maybe find a less cursed part of town, if such a place exists, you hear something. A deep, rhythmic shouting. Not angry, not panicked, just loud. People are gathered again, circling a raised platform built from worn sandstone blocks. Curiosity is a disease you haven't shaken. So of course, you follow the noise. When you reach the plaza, you freeze. There's a girl on the platform, maybe 20 years old, eyes downcast, face rigid. Next to her stands an older man in a faded robe. He points at her like she's livestock. He's trying to return for being defective. People are gathered close, murmuring, jeering. And just beside them is a scribe recording everything onto a small clay tablet, his stylus moving without pause. This is no ordinary crowd. This is a marriage tribunal. The man announces the charges. The girl is his wife. He accuses her of infidelity. He says she has betrayed both his household and the gods, that she took another lover under the very nose of Marduk himself. The crowd oos like it's a street puppet show. This is entertainment. A woman's ruin turned into morning theatre. You try to back away, but people are packed in too tight. Then the judge, an official with a high hat and a staff carved with lions, asks the crowd if anyone can confirm or deny the charges. No one steps forward. No one ever does. The girl stays silent. The silence is damning. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian society had a highly structured legal system, especially when it came to marriage and fidelity. Adultery wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a crime, punishable by death in some cases. The Code of Hammurabi, yes, the one that shows up in textbooks, laid out specific rules about accusations, evidence, and penalties. And those penalties were inventive. The judge announces the verdict. The man is telling the truth, or at least truthy enough. The punishment. The girl will be paraded through the streets, stripped of her outer robe, and then dunked in the river. If she survives, the gods have forgiven her. If she doesn't, well, at least she's clean now. That's when two guards grab her arms. You think about stepping forward, saying something. You imagine yourself shouting, "This is madness," like you're in a dramatic stage play, but your feet don't move, and neither does anyone else's. Here's the quirky detail for you. In Babylon, trial by water wasn't just a punishment, it was a divine judgment tool, literally dunking people in the river and letting the gods decide if they deserve to live. If they drowned, guilty. If they floated or survived, innocent. That's justice, our ancient edition. They pull her toward the river, her sandals fall off, she trips once on the stone steps, but no one helps. She's led to a wooden platform above the current, hands bound loosely, symbolically, more than anything. One of the guards mutters a prayer to Enki, the water god, and then she's dropped in. The crowd leans forward, breathless. You watch her hit the water, vanish for a heartbeat, then surface, coughing and flailing. She fights the current, scrambles for the dock. It takes her nearly a full minute, but she makes it. Wet, gasping, her hair clinging to her face like seaweed, she collapses on the stone, alive. And the crowd? They cheer, not for her, for the gods. The gods have spoken, she's been judged, and now she can go home and pretend her life hasn't been shattered. But her husband? He turns his back and walks away. She won't be going home. She'll be cast out, legally divorced by default, a woman with no property, no status, and a reputation smeared with divine stink. You finally manage to slip away as the crowd begins to disperse. The scribe is still scratching away at his tablet like it's the gossip of the week. And you? You feel like something inside you cracked. You find a bench in the shade of a fig tree. A fruit vendor walks by, offers you a handful of pomegranates. You take one, peel it just slowly. Red seeds bleed into your hand like tiny gems. You eat without tasting. There's a scholar sitting nearby, young, with ink-stained fingers and a fraying satchel. He notices your expression and says, "First time watching River Judgment?" You nod. "Don't worry," he says, "you get used to it." Do you? You ask him what happens to women like her. "Some marry again," he says. "Some become temple servants. Others," he shrugs, "vanish." Then he changes the subject entirely and asks if you've seen the ziggurat at dusk. You haven't, and you don't care. Here's the scholarly debate of the day. Some historians believe these public trials were rare, symbolic, more spectacle than reality. Others argue they were commonplace, a form of social control dressed in ceremonial robes. After all, fear is a great tool, especially when you make the river itself your co-judge. As the sun climbs higher, you stare out over the water. You think about the girl's face, stone still as she listened to her sentence. The weight of that silence. The kind of silence only possible when everyone around you has agreed to believe in the system more than in justice. In Babylon, guilt doesn't need proof, it only needs performance. Later that same day, you find yourself back in the marketplace trying desperately to act normal. You chew on a dried fig. You stare too long at a clay tablet featuring a surprisingly detailed depiction of two goats doing things. You nod politely at a man selling love charms who looks like he hasn't known love or charm since Sargon the Great was a boy. Everyone's pretending this is just a regular Tuesday, but your brain is still reeling from the river trial, from the cheers, from the way the woman was both punished and forgiven in the same moment. And then, just when you think Babylon has run out of twisted surprises, you hear shouting, jovial, rowdy, almost festive. You follow it, because apparently that's your whole personality now, and arrive at an open plaza filled with bright fabric tents, music, and a crowd forming a semicircle around a large platform. It's like a carnival, if carnivals were less cotton candy and more human auction. Welcome to the Virgin Bride Market. The first thing you notice is the lineup. Young women standing in rows, arranged roughly from most elaborately dressed to least. At first glance you might think it's a bridal fashion show. And in a way it is, except instead of getting a bouquet, these girls get purchased. A man in a black tunic steps onto the platform and announces the beginning of the annual marriage auction. All eligible virgins of this district, he says, present and accounted for. The crowd cheers like he's just announced free wine. One by one the girls are brought forward. The first is breathtaking, probably 17, with eyes like lapis and hair coiled into perfect loops. The bidding starts fast. Hands shoot up, gold rings flash. A fat merchant wins her for what sounds like a small nation's annual barley yield. The second girl steps forward. She's beautiful too, though less extravagantly so. Still, the crowd competes. There's laughter, shouts, jokes in Sumerian that you probably wouldn't want translated. And you realise what's happening. This isn't just about marriage, it's about status. These men aren't just buying wives, they're showing off wealth, taste, and the ability to outbid their rivals. It's like an ancient version of flashing your sports car, only your car is a terrified teenager in a silk shawl. Here's your historical fact. According to Herodotus and some cuneiform records, Babylon held annual bride auctions, especially for young women who lacked dowries. The money earned from selling the most beautiful brides would be used to fund marriages for the less desirable ones. It was, by their logic, an equalizing system. A community effort. And here comes the strange twist, it sort of was. After the top brides are sold off to the highest bidders, the auctioneer starts pulling from the middle and bottom rows. These girls are plainer, older, or marked in some way. A limp, a scar, or simply not meeting the rigid Babylonian beauty standards. And here's where things flip. Instead of buyers paying for the bride, the auctioneer starts offering dowries to the men. That's right. You want this girl? Or we'll pay you to marry her, Mir. At first, this seems horrifying, but then you realise, without this part of the system, these women would likely never marry. And in Babylon, that means no household, no status, no protection. You can't work alone, you can't own property, you're just floating, legally invisible. In a society where everything's about hierarchy and family lines, that's as good as being dead. A middle-aged man steps forward to claim one of the girls in the paid-to-take tier. She doesn't look surprised. She nods once, expression unreadable, and walks calmly toward him. A priest marks their names in a book. Just like that, they're married. You're watching all of this with the same expression people get when they witness a slow-motion goat cart crash. It's horrifying, but you cannot look away. A quirky detail: one girl, probably just barely old enough, is auctioned with a clay token tied around her neck that literally reads, "Excellent hips, not great eyes." Not charming, hips. Some scribe really took the time to inscribe that. Priorities. You ask one of the men nearby if these auctions are common. Once a year, he says. Best way to get a good wife without wasting time negotiating with her father. You ask what happens if no one bids, even with the dowry. He shrugs. Temple service, or weaving, or worse. Worse, you suspect, means a life of servitude with no name attached to your work. Now for your scholarly debate. Modern historians can't agree on whether these auctions were truly widespread or if they were limited to specific cities or classes. Some argue the practice was voluntary and fair, empowering even, given that some women had the right to refuse a match. Others say those rights were rarely honoured in practice. Either way, the bride market has become one of Babylon's most enduring and unsettling reputations. Back in the plaza, the last girl has just been won for a small satchel of lentils and a promise to build her a roofed home. She's thin, her tunic patched. But the way she clutches her husband's arm, it's hard to tell if it's relief or resignation. The crowd begins to disperse. The platform is swept clean. Musicians strike up a tune, and children start dancing, as if they hadn't just watched women get sold to strangers like plucked dates in a basket. You sit down on a bench and try to make sense of it all. Was this empowerment? A form of welfare, or just socially sanctioned commodification dressed up with garlands and flutes? And then you remember the most Babylonian truth of all. Sometimes it's all three. In this city, even kindness comes laced with ownership. Even charity comes with strings. And the prettiest flowers grow from the strangest soil. By now, your definition of normal has eroded like a mud brick in a flash flood. In Babylon, One day you're dodging goat entrails in the market. The next you're watching teenage girls get auctioned to sweaty merchants. And if you think the city's rituals can't get any weirder, just wait until spring hits. And with it, the festival of Akitu. You first hear about it from a boy selling reed baskets. Tomorrow, he whispers, wide-eyed, the gods change everything. You ask what that means, and he just grins with way too many teeth and runs off. That's always a good sign. At dawn, a blast of horns echoes across the city. The ziggurat bells ring so hard the air vibrates. People pour into the streets wearing wreaths of barley and strange little clay amulets that look like they were made in a hurry by someone who hates proportions. You're swept up in a crowd moving toward the city centre, past the statue of Marduk, Babylon's top god, the big cheese, the divine CEO, and his temple, which is currently being decorated with red cords and a lot of feathers. Like, a lot of feathers. Someone's budget went wild. Today marks the beginning of the New Year festival, Akitu, a 12-day party that involves drinking, sacrifices, ritual humiliation, and yes, very specific kinds of recreational partner swapping. You know, like all great holidays. You've barely had time to figure out what's happening before the crowds divide into two processions. One heads for the city gate, the other toward the temple gardens. You do what any rational person would do. You follow the one with music and less smoke. In the gardens, couples gather, some already dancing, others laughing awkwardly. There's a charged atmosphere, like the moment before a storm, or a particularly sketchy college orientation week. A priest stands on a platform and begins a long prayer to Marduk and Ishtar, calling for renewal, abundance and peace among the city's households. Then comes the part that makes your eyebrows do things they shouldn't. The ritual of sacred union begins, and not just for the high priest and priestess this time. Oh no, this one's communal. Here's your historical fact. During Akitu, ancient Babylon celebrated the reaffirmation of divine order through ritual reenactments, including symbolic marriages. The central event involved the king, or substitute, joining with the high priestess in a highly formal, often sexual ritual symbolizing the union of Marduk and Ishtar. But among the populace, versions of this rite were practiced on a smaller, more participatory scale, essentially a religiously sanctioned free-for-all. Some couples came together specifically for the festival. Some married people took a break under divine blessing. Others swapped partners for the night, believing it would purge past sins and bring good luck. This wasn't scandal, it was obedience. A woman next to you leans in and says, "Have you chosen your blessing yet?" You give a nervous laugh. She smiles, tilts her head. You're new, always comforting when strangers can clock your spiritual confusion. She points to a stone basin filled with barley wine and a bunch of small tablets. Each one bears a name, likely drawn earlier in the day. Random divine matchmaking. You pick one, a name you don't recognize. Someone in the garden is holding your match, waiting for you. You tuck the tablet into your belt and very casually walk away. You pass couples disappearing behind hedges, under canopies, into garden alcoves where soft laughter and moaning spill out like songbirds. A man in priest robes walks by, his arm around two people who look very relaxed. It's a religious vibe, but also weirdly like a summer camp for culty extroverts. And here's a fringe theory for your collection. Some researchers believe that during Akitu, individuals were encouraged, or at least not discouraged, from stepping outside their usual roles, relationships, and boundaries. One theory suggests that these rituals weren't just about renewal, but about controlled chaos, a temporary sanctioned release valve for the society's rigid structure. In other words, Babylon gave you 12 days a year to go absolutely off script so you could behave the other 353. You take refuge near a small fountain and watch a young man nervously approaching a woman twice his age. She laughs, accepts a garland from him, and they walk off together. You sip some wine handed to you by a child with the dead-eyed focus of someone born into catering. It tastes like regret and raisins. Nearby, an older couple, probably married, blesses each other with oil, then ceremonially part ways, each going to find a temporary partner. They'll reunite tomorrow, refreshed and absolved, like nothing ever happened. You wonder how many jealous fights this system prevents, or causes, probably both. Then comes the main event. Back in the temple square, the mock king, a stand-in for the real one, has been ritually slapped by the high priest and stripped of his robes. The people laugh. He's paraded through the streets, humbled, representing the surrender of the mortal realm to divine will. Later, he'll be rewarded for his sacrifice with a feast, new clothes, and, depending on how things go, possibly a few very personal thank yous from select temple servants. You watch him pass, smiling gamely, wearing nothing but a crown and extremely brave eye contact. The crowd roars with approval. Here's a quirky footnote. Some clay texts describe a specific phrase the priest would say while slapping the king. Something like, "If you cry, Marduk will not hear you." Classic, spiritual abuse with a poetic twist. As night falls, the torches return. The air is full of perfume, smoke, and the kind of heat that clings. The garden's transformed into a glowing maze of bodies and whispered prayers. You can't tell who's with whom anymore. Maybe that's the point. Someone finds you. Maybe your match, maybe not. They smile, take your hand, say nothing. You don't move. Not yet. Because here's the thing about Babylon. After a while, even the unthinkable starts to feel inevitable. Morning in Babylon doesn't feel like a reset. It feels like a hangover disguised as sunshine. The streets are sluggish, littered with broken garlands and half-smashed amphorae. Someone snoring under a palm tree. A goat stands on a table like it won a bet. You pass a group of priests still chanting, their voices hoarse but determined. The festival of Akatu isn't over. It just never really stops. You're bleary-eyed, bruised in ways you can't explain, and half convinced you saw someone last night wearing a lion mask and quoting Ishtar while juggling figs. That might have been real. Or wine. Honestly, the line's blurred permanently now. You're on your way to find breakfast, or possibly a new life, when you turn a corner and find yourself face to face with one of the palace guards. He's massive, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven except for a stylized strip of beard that looks aggressively oiled. His armor glints in the sun, and he's not smiling. "You," he says. "The scribes want you." And just like that, you're not hungry anymore. You're escorted through the palace's side entrance, through shadowed halls decorated with elaborate tile mosaics of men stabbing lions, lions stabbing men, lions stabbing each other. Look, it's a theme. Eventually you're brought into a wide marble chamber, where a scribe sits on a raised dais, flanked by more guards. The scribe's robes are pristine, his hair curled into those tight spirals that only happen when someone spends 3 hours on your head with a bronze rod and oil. He gestures for you to sit, then, without looking up from his tablet, says, "Tell me what you know of the eunuchs." Okay, so this just got serious. You clear your throat and admit you know what everyone knows. Eunuchs serve in the palace, guard the harem, run messages, and are generally considered trustworthy. The scribe looks up slowly, pinning you with an expression that could curdle milk. And do you know why they are trusted? This feels like a trick, and you're painfully aware there are men with sharp things standing behind you, so you choose honesty, Tov. Because they can't interfere. The scribe smiles thinly. Correct. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian palaces, like those of many ancient empires, employed eunuchs, men who had been castrated, often in childhood, to serve in positions of sensitive authority. They guarded the king's wives and concubines, managed inner court affairs, and were believed to be loyal due to their lack of family ambition. No heirs, no threats. But what you don't expect, what absolutely hits like a punch, is when the scribe stands and gestures toward a corridor. "Come," he says. "There is a room we think you should see." You follow him. You shouldn't, but you do. The guards flank you in silence. The corridor grows darker, cooler. You descend a few stairs, the stone damp beneath your sandals, and then he opens a thick wooden door, and your breath catches. This room, it's silent in a way that feels too deliberate. A long, low table runs through the centre, with bronze tools laid out in careful order. Hooks, bowls, cloth, a drain in the floor, a bench stain darker than the rest. Welcome to the castration chamber. You want to look away, but you can't. There's something magnetic about the quiet horror of it. You realise with cold clarity that this isn't just for show. This place still gets used. The scribe explains, voice dry and calm, that candidates for eunuch service are selected young, usually orphans or slaves, sometimes even war captives. The operation is done here, clean, ritualistic, blessed, and utterly final. You want to ask why he's telling you this, but you already know. It's not about the eunuchs, it's about control. This is Babylon's favourite game. The scribe walks you through the tools one by one. This, he says, prepares, this cuts, this seals, this purifies. You realise he's not being cruel, he genuinely believes he's describing something holy. Here's the quirky fact. In some versions of temple law, Eunuchs weren't just servants. They were believed to be spiritually closer to the gods, existing outside the constraints of normal male or female roles. Some wore makeup, jewellery, and performed dances in the name of Ishtar or other deities, becoming sacred intermediaries. Divine but neutered, Nezoastepan. Of course there is. Some scholars argue eunuchs were respected. Others argue they were exploited and discarded when no longer useful. There's no consistent story, only fragments. You ask the scribe if the eunuchs choose this life. He answers with a look that says, "Don't ask stupid questions." Before you leave, the scribe gestures toward the far wall, where a row of small alcoves hold clay figures, little statues with smooth blank faces and no genitals. Each one is labelled with a name. You wonder if these are memorials or warnings. When you emerge into the sunlight again, you feel shaky, changed. Your hands smell faintly of smoke and disinfectant herbs. The guards say nothing as they escort you back into the city streets and vanish like smoke into the crowd. You wander without purpose for a while. Everything feels quieter now. Even the bells seem dulled. You sit near a fountain and watch two children play with a carved wooden horse. One of them pushes it too hard and the head breaks off. Neither of them cries. And maybe that's Babylon in miniature, a city built on breaking things quietly, people, bodies, beliefs, dreams, and somehow pretending that the pieces look better scattered. You don't go near the palace district for the next 2 days, not even close. You avoid anything with shaved heads, perfectly oiled beards, or the faintest smell of sterilized bronze. Every time you pass a eunuch in the market, you fight the instinct to look too long. Not out of judgment, out of deep, skin-prickling guilt. Because now you know what it cost them, and they walk past you every day like nothing happened. Instead, you try to reorient yourself in the more normal parts of the city. The bakeries smell like sesame and honey. The scribes are out copying business contracts and cursing about the sun drying their ink too fast. For a moment, you even believe you might just go a few hours without witnessing something deeply horrifying. But this is Babylon, and you, dear listener, have terrible luck. While wandering the edges of the temple district, you swear it was an accident. You find yourself back near the ziggurat. Not the towering main one, but a smaller satellite temple, its bricks scorched by sun and age. You approach out of mild curiosity and very poor judgment. Then you hear it. A sharp cry, not pain exactly, but something close, shocked surrender. You hesitate. Do you walk away? Of course not. You step through a curtained doorway and immediately wish you hadn't. What you see next feels like you've stumbled into a fever dream staged by performance art students who took too many hallucinogens. There's a small chamber lit with oil lamps, walls draped in black and indigo cloth. In the centre lies a man, fully clothed except for a wide opening at the chest. Around him, 4 women in ceremonial garb are chanting and rubbing his body with thick oil that glows faintly green under the lamplight. A 5th woman stands over him, whispering into his ear in a language you don't understand. Then, without warning, one of the women brings out a sharp, curved blade. Not for violence, thankfully, but for something else. Engraving. She presses the blade to the man's chest and begins to etch shallow, symbolic cuts along his skin, tracing patterns you vaguely recognize from temple carvings, spirals, eyes, what might be a scorpion. The man's breathing speeds up, but he doesn't cry out again. This, apparently, is a ritual of possession, and you're the unwilling audience. A temple acolyte notices you standing dumbstruck and gently guides you aside. "You are lucky," he says. "Few outsiders see this rite." You try to smile. It feels like your face is sliding off. Here's your historical fact. In Babylonian spiritual practices, particularly those tied to Ishtar and other chthonic deities, ritual possession was sometimes used to purge sin, welcome divine visions, or enter a temporary state of sacred madness. Priests and priestesses might enter trance states via music, drugs, sex, or pain, sometimes all at once, to allow the gods to speak through them. The man on the floor is now twitching gently. One of the women, maybe the high priestess, places a small clay idol on his chest. It's Ishtar. Of course, she of war, sex, and inconvenient timing. The priestess announces that the man has been chosen as a vessel for divine wisdom. For the next 3 days, he will live in the temple, speak in riddles, and be waited upon. He is not to be questioned, not to be touched, not to be denied anything. And then she looks at you. Would you like to assist? You have no idea what that means, but apparently you nod. Because the next thing you know, you're helping carry the now unconscious man to a padded alcove in the back of the temple. You're handed a bowl of herbs, a cloth, and instructions to keep his forehead cool. Don't wake him. Just listen. Great. You've become a babysitter for a man who might start channeling divine rage any minute. While he sleeps, you sit cross-legged beside him, listening to the murmur of chants from the next room. You watch the faint rise and fall of his chest. You notice the fine, fresh cuts beginning to scab. You wonder if he wanted this, or if he simply reached a point where this bizarre surrender seemed better than being invisible. Here's your quirky fact. Some Babylonian temples kept detailed records of vessel performances, and one tablet even describes a man possessed by the goddess who ordered everyone to strip and dance like peacocks. No one argued. There are no notes about how that went, only that he was served a fig and declared well marbled of mind before falling asleep in a grain basket. You sit with the vessel for hours. Eventually he wakes, eyes wide, unfocused, glowing with that slightly insane shine you've come to associate with Babylonian religious experience. He speaks. I saw Ishtar riding the lion of the north. Her eyes burned stars into my skull. She said, "The walls of the world are teeth." You write that down, just in case it's useful later. Then he looks directly to you and whispers, "She also said, you're not from here." You freeze, but he closes his eyes again and sinks back into sleep, smiling faintly, as though Ishtar herself had given him a gentle pat on the head. The priestess returns. She thanks you, touches your forehead with her thumb, and says, "The goddess sees your curiosity. You should be careful, she eats the curious." Again with the terrifying compliments. You stumble out of the temple into the fading afternoon light. The city bustles around you like nothing happened. But you feel like you've just spent 6 hours in the basement of the gods, and they definitely made eye contact. You find a bench, sit hard and stare at a cracked amphora rolling down the street like it's got secrets. Somewhere in the back of your skull you hear a whisper. The walls of the world are teeth. You really hope that was metaphor. You wake the next morning tangled in reed mats and regret. There's something sticky in your hair. Possibly honey, possibly temple incense, possibly whatever's left of your sanity. Babylon has a way of getting inside your bones and rearranging the furniture of your soul without asking. You sit up slowly, head pounding, stomach hollow, and your first thought is never again, followed immediately by, again when? After washing your face in a public basin surrounded by 3 goats and a man furiously scrubbing a chicken, you try to remember what day it is. You've lost track of time entirely. Babylon doesn't care about weeks, only festivals, harvests, and whether the gods are in the mood to be merciful or moody. You wander through a quiet street near the scribes' quarter when something odd catches your eye. A pair of women arguing in front of a small stall. One of them is waving a clay tablet in the other's face like it's a cursed lottery ticket. You inch closer, doing your usual pretending to examine fruit routine, and that's when you hear one of them hiss, "You said he'd dream of me." Ah, magic. You love it when people pretend things aren't completely out of hand, but nothing says things are exactly out of hand like 2 noble women screaming over a sex spell gone wrong. You hang back and watch as the seller, an older woman draped in amulets, with a face like wrinkled papyrus, rolls her eyes and mutters something in Akkadian that definitely isn't polite. She shoos them away, then notices you hovering and gives you a long, suspicious look. "You want love?" she asks. You're too sleep-deprived to lie, so you say, "Not especially." She shrugs. "Then maybe you need revenge." And just like that, you've been adopted by a Babylonian magic worker, or as the scribes call her behind her back, that crazy old woman with the wax dolls and sharp teeth. She invites you into her cramped little shop, more of a stall with curtains, and inside you find what can only be described as the spiritual version of a medieval kitchen junk drawer, bowls of powders, dried herbs, bones, feathers, and yes, clay figurines with exaggerated body parts. Some male, some female, some undecided. The walls are lined with shelves stacked with cuneiform tablets, each covered in scrawled symbols, drawings, and what appear to be erotic curses. The woman, whose name turns out to be Ashratum, gestures at one. "This one makes your enemy impotent." Then another. "This one makes your ex fall in love with a donkey." She grins. "Don't ask how I found that out." Here's your historical fact. Babylonian magic wasn't just superstition, it was a recognized science. There were trained professionals called Ashipu and Kasaptu who specialized in rituals, incantations, and protective charms. Their work ranged from healing the sick to destroying a rival's sex life with shocking creativity. And yes, they kept detailed records of it all. You're holding one right now. and it's surprisingly heavy for what amounts to ancient erotic fanfiction with side effects. Ashratum explains that Babylonian love magic falls into two categories: attraction and destruction. Want someone to notice you? There's a potion for that. Want their loins to burn until they beg you to end it? Oh, she's got that covered too. All ingredients locally sourced, naturally, very ethical, except for the occasional frog. She opens a small wooden box and reveals what can only be described as spell components. Dolls made of clay, wax, and even bread dough. Some are pierced with thorns, others are lovingly carved. One has tiny golden earrings. She paid extra, Ashratum shrugs. You're allowed to pick up one of the dolls. It's surprisingly detailed. Male, well endowed, eyes wide in a permanent state of surprise. There's a tiny inscription along the base. You squint at it. She wanted him to only dream of her, Ashratum explains, but she forgot the moon offering, so now he just screams about owls. Here's a quirky fact. In Mesopotamian magic, owls were associated with nightmares and spirits, especially Lilitu, a female demon linked to lust, infertility, and sleep disturbances. She was a frequent target or tool in sex magic. Some spells even involved writing her name on a tablet and burying it under the victim's bed. Sweet dreams. As Ashratum continues her very casual tour of erotic curses and how to weaponize goat liver, you spot a small tablet half buried in a jar. You pull it out and your brain short-circuits for a moment. It's poetry. Graphic poetry. Very, very detailed. Ashratum grins. That one's a classic and written by a priestess who got rejected. You ask what happened to the man it was written for. He married a merchant's daughter, she says, but he couldn't. She makes a vague downward gesture. After that. There's a scholarly debate about all this, by the way. Some academics argue that Mesopotamian magic was deeply spiritual, more psychology than witchcraft. Others say it was basically ancient spite, baked into clay and flung at whoever broke your heart. Either way, the results were taken extremely seriously. People feared these curses. Some carried protective charms on their bodies, little tablets tucked in their belts to keep their lovers faithful and their enemies facid. Before you leave, Ashratum offers you a small amulet, just a bit of carved obsidian with the symbol of Ishtar on it. Wear it on your left wrist, she says. Not right. Right hand feeds, left hand binds. You don't question her. Outside, the sun has risen high. You feel like you've just walked out of a dream, stitched together from herbal smoke, whispered names, and dangerously specific instructions about owl demons. You walk slowly through the city, watching couples argue, flirt, and ignore each other in equal measure. You wonder how many of them are in love because they want to be, and how many are just under the influence of a carefully worded prayer baked into clay and hidden in their garden. You look at the amulet in your hand. It's warm from Ashratum's fingers. You don't put it on. Not yet. As the day stretches on, Babylon feels heavier than usual, the streets humming with the muted chaos of commerce, ritual, and something more sinister you can't quite put your finger on. Merchants yell over each other, hawking figs, oil and clay figurines, while children dart between carts like tiny predators in training. You're trying to blend in, walking past the ziggurat that towers above the city like a solemn, watchful god. Its bricks glow in the late afternoon sun, catching fire in shades of burnt gold, and yet, every corner you turn, the city seems to pulse with secrets, some whispered, some carved into stone, some practiced in shadows. Drawn by a low chant, you wander into a narrower alley, where incense smoke curls lazily from a half-hidden temple. The smell is intoxicating, jasmine, myrrh, and something musky that makes your stomach twist and your heart skip. Inside, the air is cooler, thick with ritual. A circle of figures kneels on soft rugs, candles casting elongated shadows that flicker like restless spirits. They chant in low, almost hypnotic tones, and their hands move rhythmically over clay tablets etched with intricate symbols. At the centre sits a small altar. On it a carved lion, a tiny figure of Ishtar perched atop its back. The participants are performing a fertility rite, one that looks both meticulous and unnervingly intimate. Here's your historical fact. Fertility rituals were central to Babylonian religion. They were intended to ensure prosperity for crops, livestock, and human families alike. Sometimes these rituals involved symbolic sexual acts, sometimes offerings of food, wine, or incense, and occasionally, as accounts suggest, participants would enact divine unions, believing that their actions could influence the gods themselves. These rites were highly formalized with specific prayers, chants, and ceremonial tools including clay figurines like those Ashratum showed you. A figure in the circle, a young priestess, suddenly gestures toward you. You freeze. Then, without explanation, she hands you a small, flat clay tablet. On it, etched in delicate cuneiform, is a love charm. It's meant to bind a desired partner to the bearer's heart. Your fingers tremble as you hold it, aware that this isn't some harmless trinket. In Babylon, a charm like this is taken seriously. It's not magic in the whimsical sense, it's a tool, and like all tools, it can harm or heal depending on the hand that wields it. Quirky fact, some Babylonian charms were constructed to influence dreams. One could place a tablet under a pillow and supposedly induce visions of love, or nightmares of rejection, depending on the incantation. Some scholars even suggest that the dream influence aspect of these charms contributed to what modern psychology would call placebo effects or subconscious suggestion. Basically, Babylonian science meets superstition in clay form. While you're processing this, one of the ritual participants, a man with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to obedience, leans over. "Do you understand what you hold?" he asks. You mumble something non-committal. He nods, apparently satisfied. "Then carry it carefully. It chooses its moments." You have no idea what that means, but it sounds ominous, which fits right in with the city's usual energy. You leave the temple, tablet tucked safely into your belt. Outside, the streets are thrumming with life. Children chase goats, a woman sings over a basket of dates, a dog barks at a cart full of grain. And yet every mundane scene is tinged with the latent tension of Babylonian society. The knowledge that every action, every glance, every whispered word could be seen, judged, or ritualized. Even something as simple as walking down a street could have unseen consequences. A subtle breeze carries the faint smell of roasted meat and incense, and as you breathe it in, your thoughts drift to what Ashratum told you. That love, desire, and fear are all instruments in Babylon, that the gods see through masks and ceremonies alike, that a single action, or even an inaction, can ripple across lives in ways you might not understand for decades. The thought is dizzying. You make your way to a bench near the river. The water shimmers, reflecting the setting sun in fragmented gold, reminding you of the ziggurats bricks earlier. Across the water, a group of women gathers, their voices lilting in song as they prepare for a smaller ritual. Perhaps it's a purification rite or a prelude to another festival. Whatever it is, the devotion is palpable. Even from your distance, you can feel the power of belief pressing down, heavy but strangely comforting in its consistency. As evening approaches, the city begins to change. Lanterns are lit, flickering lights casting long shadows on walls and cobblestones. The air grows cooler, carrying hints of smoke, spices, and damp earth. In the distance, faint drumming begins, a reminder that even when you stop noticing, Babylon doesn't. It moves, breathes, and demands attention. You tuck the tablet safely in your robe, feeling both the weight of its promise and the weight of the city pressing in from all sides. In Babylon, curiosity is both a gift and a danger, and tonight, it's yours to carry. Night falls like a heavy velvet curtain over Babylon, and the city takes on a new, more intimate personality. Torches flicker along the streets, throwing long shadows across cracked stones, while the soft murmur of the Euphrates carries through the alleys, mingling with distant chants. The air is thick with the aroma of roasted grain, perfumed oil, and the faint metallic tang of fear. Even from the riverbank you can feel the pulse of the city, the quiet tension that always precedes ritual, the unspoken knowledge that the gods are watching, and that in Babylon there's no separating the sacred from the disturbing. Drawn once more toward the temple district, you find yourself near a cluster of smaller shrines, tucked behind high walls and hanging vines. One shrine, dedicated to Ishtar, emits a strange, almost magnetic energy. From within you hear soft chanting, low and rhythmic, punctuated by what sounds like the quiet beating of drums. Peeking through a crack in the door, you see a priestess kneeling over a small bronze basin. She is reading the liver of a freshly sacrificed sheep, her hands moving with practiced precision, tracing symbols on the animal's surface as if they were instructions from another world. Your stomach flips. This is Babylonian divinatory magic, and it is far more precise and unsettling than anything you've witnessed so far. Here's your historical fact. Hepatoscopy, or the practice of reading livers for omens, was an important part of Mesopotamian divination. Priests used sheep livers, often waxed or marked with small incisions, to predict everything from harvest success to military outcomes and personal fortune. Every mark, vein, and coloration was interpreted according to highly codified manuals that only trained diviners could read accurately. Quirky fact, some tablets reveal that the Babylonians had specialized clay models of livers for training apprentices. These were sometimes more accurate than the actual organs, allowing priests to practice reading omens without wasting a real animal. Imagine a sheep-shaped workbook designed for necromancy and personal anxiety. As you watch, the priestess mutters under her breath, tracing a small spiral near the gallbladder. A soft hum rises, vibrating through the floor. According to legend, spirals represented hidden danger or unexpected events. You're suddenly aware of how small and mortal you feel, standing at the periphery of a divine conversation you cannot fully understand. The quiet intensity of the room is almost hypnotic. The soft flicker of the oil lamp and the metallic gleam of the basin make every movement feel both sacred and ominous. A shadow moves behind you. You turn just in time to see a young acolyte slip silently through the doorway. His hands are empty, but his eyes are wide with a mixture of awe and fear. He whispers something in Sumerian, pointing toward the priestess. You catch one word, Lily 2. Apparently this divination session isn't just about ordinary luck. It's about unseen spirits, particularly nocturnal entities associated with sex, nightmares and misfortune. The Babylonians believed Lilitu prowled the night, targeting women and men alike, causing strange dreams or illness. Seeing her influence interpreted in the liver is both fascinating and horrifying. You crouch lower, trying not to disturb the ritual, but your curiosity gets the better of you. The priestess lifts her gaze briefly, eyes dark and luminous. She nods once, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging your presence. That gesture sends a shiver down your spine. For a city built on divine mandates, symbols and fear, even a small nod feels loaded with authority. You quickly avert your gaze, pretending to examine the door's carved motifs, spirals and stylized lions that seem to stare back with patient judgment. The divination ends suddenly. The priestess seals the liver in a clay jar, marking it with symbols to preserve its reading. The acolyte begins copying notes onto a fresh tablet with meticulous strokes. You watch the process, recognizing patterns you cannot fully understand. This ritual, half science, half religion, and entirely inscrutable, reminds you just how entwined belief, sexuality, and authority are in Babylon. Even omens about crops and battles are connected in subtle ways to fertility, desire, and control. Here's a scholarly debate. Some historians argue that liver divination was purely practical, a proto-scientific attempt to manage uncertainty. Others contend that it reinforced social hierarchies and moral expectations, including sexual norms and power dynamics within the temple and society at large. The two interpretations are not mutually exclusive. The liver may have been both an oracle and a mechanism for maintaining order. By the time you leave the shrine, the city has quieted slightly, though the underlying hum of ritual persists. You walk toward the river, carrying a faint scent of incense in your hair and the echo of the acolyte's whisper in your mind. You wonder how many other hidden practices, the strange, the erotic, the terrifying, exist just beyond the reach of your perception, waiting to be seen by someone else foolish enough to wander too close. In Babylon, the night is alive, the city is alive, and even shadows seem to participate in worship, bending toward Ishtar's invisible gaze. You sit on the riverbank, watching the moon's reflection ripple across the water. Somewhere in the city, drums begin again. A faint chant rises, as if carried by the wind. You clutch your robe, feeling the weight of everything you've seen. The rituals, the charms, the sacrifices, the obsidian amulet from Ashratum, and realize that in Babylon, curiosity is both a gift and a danger, a key and a chain. You shiver, not from cold, but from the persistent hum of the city's living, breathing enigma. The next morning, the city feels even heavier, as though the shadows from the night before have lingered, crawling along walls and through alleys like living things. The streets are narrower than you remember, or perhaps it's just your mind playing tricks. Smoke rises from countless hearths, mingling with the lingering scent of incense and the faint tang of unwashed bodies, creating a perfume only Babylon could claim as normal. You walk past carts piled high with clay pots, goats, and mysterious bundles that might contain grain, or something much more sinister. The city is awake, humming with life, and yet it feels watchful, as if it knows you're still too curious for your own safety. Drawn by the faint sound of flutes and chanting, you veer into a smaller courtyard tucked between two temple complexes. The area is quiet except for the soft shuffle of feet and the whisper of prayers. You catch sight of a priest in a white robe leading a young couple toward a marble platform covered in silk. Their hands are entwined, and yet there's a ritualistic tension in the way they walk, a gravity to their every step. They are about to participate in a sacred union rite, one performed not for lust, but for the blessing of the gods and the continuity of Babylonian society. The ceremony is highly codified, with prayers, gestures and offerings precisely timed, leaving no room for improvisation. Every action has meaning. Every touch is charged with divine significance. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian sacred unions were often performed in temple precincts, particularly those devoted to Ishtar. They were intended to honour the goddess and invoke fertility, prosperity and cosmic harmony. While some unions were symbolic, performed by priests or ritual representatives, others were enacted by citizens in carefully prescribed rituals that reinforced social and religious hierarchies. These ceremonies were considered essential for maintaining both spiritual and civic order. A quirky aspect, some rituals involved symbolic clothing exchanges or the placement of garlands and jewellery on the participants, which could later be interpreted as magical endorsements of love, fidelity or fertility. The more elaborate the exchange, the greater the spiritual potency assigned to the ritual. It's equal parts theatre, devotion and social messaging, like a Broadway play written by the gods themselves. As you observe, a priestess hands the couple a small clay tablet inscribed with cuneiform symbols. The tablet represents their commitment, but it also functions as a kind of spiritual insurance. Should either party stray, the tablet is a witness, a sacred record that the gods may invoke as proof. It's unsettling how concrete this makes divine oversight feel. In Babylon, even love carries accountability. And even intimacy has witnesses carved in clay. A man standing nearby catches your gaze. He's wearing a bronze amulet depicting a lion and a crescent moon. His eyes are sharp, calculating, and briefly, they seem to measure your own intentions. Babylon has a way of assessing outsiders, gauging whether you're merely wandering or whether you are, unknowingly, participating in the city's intricate web of observation. You avert your gaze, suddenly aware of how exposed you are. Here's a fringe theory. Some scholars believe that temple unions, especially those tied to Ishtar, were as much about political networking and reinforcing social bonds as they were about spiritual devotion. By participating or even by witnessing these rituals, citizens demonstrated obedience and alignment with the city's divine order, subtly reinforcing class structures and familial obligations. It's devotion, diplomacy and control, all wrapped in perfumed silk and ritual gestures. The couple kneels at the platform, and the priest begins chanting, invoking blessings from Ishtar and Marduk alike. You notice that the music, the scent of oils, the flicker of lamp flames, all of it is designed to heighten awareness, to make every participant feel the weight of the divine presence. The couple's hands tighten around one another, their breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the chant. In a way that is both beautiful and terrifying, their vulnerability is on display for gods, priests, and the few silent observers like yourself. Suddenly, a young acolyte steps forward, offering a small cup of wine to the participants. The ritual is nearing its peak. The subtle interplay of consent, obedience, and symbolic gestures reaches a point where you realize that in Babylon, ritualized sexuality is never just about desire. It is about power, connection, and cosmic validation. The act itself is less intimate than its meaning. It is a carefully orchestrated performance designed to maintain balance between the human and divine, the mundane and the sacred. You step back, letting your eyes linger on the tableau just a moment longer, absorbing the subtle tension, the scent of incense, the tiny flicker of oil lamps. Babylon continues to breathe around you, indifferent yet infinitely attentive. You feel small, a single observer in a city that has codified lust, power, and devotion into daily life. And for the first time you understand that surviving here isn't just about physical endurance. It's about navigating a reality where belief, ritual, and fear are as tangible as stone and river. As the afternoon sun climbs higher, the heat presses down on Babylon like a living weight. The streets are narrower here. The walls of mud brick houses closing in with the familiarity of a cathedral that's seen too many centuries. Children dart between carts and goats, shouting in a mixture of Sumerian and Akkadian, while merchants call out, waving figs, bread, and strangely shaped clay idols. You move along cautiously, aware that every glance could be a message, every gesture a test. Babylon doesn't just watch you, it measures you, and you feel measured. Ahead, you notice a small procession forming near one of the temple gates, a crowd of people clustered around a slightly elevated platform. A priest, tall and imposing in a robe of deep crimson, is speaking in a low, sonorous voice. The words are lost to you, but the tone carries authority. You edge closer and see what the crowd is focused on. A man and a woman kneeling before a stone basin filled with water, hands clasped together. The priest raises a small object, possibly a carved figurine of Ishtar, and the couple bows further, murmuring a prayer. They are about to undergo a fertility blessing ritual, a ceremony designed to ensure children, prosperity, and the favour of the Kens. The spectacle is public, sacred, and intensely intimate. Here's your historical fact. Fertility rites were central to Babylonian society, both as a spiritual practice and as a social necessity. Priests and priestesses conducted ceremonies to invoke Ishtar's blessings, often involving symbolic gestures, offerings, and public displays of devotion. These rites were believed to ensure agricultural abundance, familial continuity, and the alignment of human activity with divine will. Every act, from the placement of hands to the utterance of prayers, carried codified meaning. A quirky detail: in some versions of these ceremonies, participants would exchange tokens, small pieces of jewellery, clay figurines, or inscribed tablets, symbolising the union of their spirits and the divine. These tokens could later be used to protect pregnancies, secure loyalty, or influence dreams. Essentially, they functioned as both ritual objects and magical insurance policies, a blend of spirituality, superstition, and social control. You watch the priest dip the figurine into the basin and trace a circle in the water, murmuring a chant that makes the surface ripple in concentric waves. The couple follows the motion with their hands, fingers intertwined, palms pressing into the cool water. You notice subtle expressions. The woman's eyes flicker with concentration. The man's jaw tightens as if bracing for invisible pressure. The ritual is both performative and deeply affecting. You're caught between admiration and unease, aware that their experience is more than symbolic. It is an enactment of the city's moral and cosmic order. Here's a scholarly debate. Some historians argue that Babylonian fertility rituals were strictly symbolic, serving as public displays of devotion and social cohesion. Others contend that many rituals involved physical enactments of sexual or intimate acts, sometimes in public, as a way to concretely embody the connection between human and divine. The historical evidence is fragmentary, with most surviving records offering only glimpses of what was truly performed versus what was meant to be symbolic. As the ritual progresses, the priest instructs the couple to drink a small portion of consecrated wine, murmuring incantations over the liquid. The act is both literal and metaphorical, symbolizing shared life, fertility, and the union of divine blessing with human participation. The couple drinks carefully, their eyes meeting briefly before returning to the ritual. You feel a tightness in your chest, a mixture of awe and discomfort, as the city's sacred and erotic dimensions converge seamlessly in the small plaza. Nearby, other participants stand with small tablets or charms, ready to replicate aspects of the ritual in their own households or with their families. Babylonian magic, ritual, and belief interweave, reinforcing social hierarchies and personal obligations. Every glance, every whispered prayer, every symbolic gesture is meticulously observed. Even as a mere spectator, you sense that your presence is noted, recorded, and perhaps interpreted, an acknowledgement that in Babylon no one truly moves unnoticed. You leave the platform reluctantly, stepping back into the heat and noise of the streets. The air smells of baked clay, roasted meat, and incense mingled with sweat. Children continue their games, merchants continue shouting, but you carry with you the image of the couple kneeling in water, their hands pressed together, caught in a sacred moment that is both terrifying and beautiful. It lingers in your mind, a reminder that Babylon's rituals are never just about spectacle. They are about survival, belief, and the delicate interplay between human desire and divine expectation. As twilight settles, the city of Babylon changes its mood yet again. The air cools slightly, carrying hints of roasted lamb, wet clay, and lingering incense from the temples. Lanterns are lit along the narrow streets, flickering in rhythm with the murmuring of distant prayers. The hum of the Euphrates seems louder at this hour, carrying the sounds of drums, chants, and the occasional clink of coins. You wander cautiously, drawn by the rhythm yet wary, knowing that anything beautiful in Babylon often hides something dark. The shadows here are thick, twisting around corners, blending the ordinary with the sacred in a way that leaves your senses unmoored. You find yourself at the edge of a garden enclosed by low mud brick walls. Inside, a small group of temple attendants prepares for a masked fertility ritual, an event that combines music, dance, and symbolism into a single orchestrated performance. Men and women wear animal masks, lions, bulls, and owls, symbols of gods, spirits, and perhaps mischief. Their robes shimmer under torchlight, and the soft sounds of flutes interweave with the low hum of chants. The masks are not for anonymity alone. They transform the wearer into a vessel of divine energy, blurring the line between human and god. You watch from a distance, enthralled and uneasy, understanding that participation is both an honour and a surrender. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian masked rituals were performed to honour gods such as Ishtar and Marduk, often during seasonal festivals like Akitu or harvest celebrations. Participants wore masks and costumes to embody divine or supernatural beings, using dance, music, and symbolic gestures to influence fertility, weather, and social harmony. These performances were both public and sacred, meant to connect humans with divine forces through embodiment and ritualized storytelling. A quirky detail. Some masks included exaggerated features, huge eyes or horns, intended to channel spiritual energy more effectively. In some cases, dancers wore masks shaped like owls to invoke Lilito, a demon associated with sexual mischief and nocturnal disturbances. Wearing these masks was believed to temporarily shift the wearer's identity, making them a medium for supernatural influence. You notice a young priest leading the dancers, tapping a small drum with precise measured beats. His eyes are intense, and his movements deliberate, ensuring the dance aligns perfectly with the chants and musical rhythm. Every footstep seems weighted with meaning, as if each shuffle on the earth could either summon blessing or catastrophe. You realize that the ritual isn't about spectacle for its own sake. It is a careful orchestration, a weaving of sound, motion, and symbolism to ensure that the community remains aligned with cosmic order. Here's a fringe theory. Some scholars suggest that these masked fertility rites may have doubled as sexualized performance art, where the combination of ritual, music, and implied eroticism created a communal release of tension. Others argue the erotic elements were symbolic rather than literal, functioning as a controlled expression of human desire under the guidance of divine oversight. Either way, the rituals were a potent blend of spiritual authority and social cohesion. As you watch, one of the owl-masked participants approaches a small pedestal, raising a clay tablet high. The priestess chants louder, and the participants respond, moving in concentric circles around her. A faint scent of oil and jasmine mixes with the earthy aroma of the garden, producing a dizzying sensory effect. You notice the subtle coordination, gestures, breathing, and even the rhythm of footsteps synchronize across the group, creating a hypnotic flow. It is beautiful, terrifying, and mesmerizing all at once. Nearby, a pair of children peek through the gate, imitating the dancers with sticks for drums. The adults barely notice. In Babylon, even children absorb ritual lessons early, learning the dance of devotion, the power of observation, and the fine line between participation and chaos. The city functions as both school and stage, shaping every resident's sense of order, propriety, and fear. Eventually, the ritual ends. The dancers lower their masks, the drumbeat fades, and the priestess sets the clay tablet down carefully on the altar. The participants bow in unison, and the crowd disperses silently, each person carrying the weight of what they have witnessed. You step back into the streets, the torchlight now soft against the darkening walls, and feel an almost physical sense of the city's pulse. In Babylon, the line between spectacle, devotion, and survival is as thin as the flame of a lamp, and just as easily extinguished. Night deepens, and Babylon transforms once more. The city seems quieter, but the undercurrent of ritual energy is undeniable, pulse beneath the cobblestones, under the lanterns, beneath the steady hum of the river. Smoke from countless hearths curls skyward, mingling with incense and the distant scent of perfumed oils. You walk cautiously through the alleys, aware that even in darkness, the city observes, measures, and evaluates. Every glance from a passerby, every whisper, every flicker of torchlight could carry layers of meaning you may never decipher. Curiosity has marked you, and Babylon never forgets. You follow a faint melody, soft and deliberate, drifting from a secluded courtyard tucked behind a high mud brick wall. Inside, a small assembly of priests and priestesses moves rhythmically, their gestures precise and carefully orchestrated. The ritual is intimate yet public, an erotic divination rite, designed to reveal desires, fortunes, and social alignments through symbolic enactments. Music, movement, and scent combine into a hypnotic flow, each element heightening the participants' awareness and connection to divine forces. The priest leading the ceremony wears a bull mask, its bronze horns catching torchlight. Every motion he makes feels imbued with cosmic significance. Here's your historical fact. Erotic divination was a documented practice in Babylon, especially within Ishtar's cult. Priests and priestesses sometimes used symbolic sexual acts, oil anointing, or ritualized touch to interpret divine will. These rites were believed to reveal personal fortune, fertility, and social compatibility. While reinforcing the connection between human and divine, the practice was codified and often recorded on clay tablets, reflecting a complex interplay of religion, sexuality, and societal control. A quirky detail, some divination rituals involved the careful observation of bodily responses, blushing, pulse, or subtle gestures as indications of divine favor or disapproval. In certain ceremonies, participants were asked to engage in symbolic acts with figurines or partners to uncover hidden desires or threats. Modern historians speculate that these observations functioned as both psychological assessment and spiritual insight, a hybrid of intuition and divinely sanctioned surveillance. You notice a priestess offering small clay tablets to each participant. The inscriptions are unclear to you, but the recipients handle them reverently, holding them close as though they contain vital secrets. One young man kneels and whispers over his tablet, eyes closed, lips moving in a soft, urgent chant. Another participant, a woman masked as a lion, steps forward and traces symbols in a shallow basin of water, her gestures mirrored by others in the circle. The repetition, precision, and coordination transform the ritual into an orchestrated experience that feels both sacred and unsettlingly intimate. You realize that in Babylon, even erotic expression is a tool of social and spiritual order. Here's a scholarly debate. Some researchers argue that erotic divination was primarily symbolic, a controlled channeling of desire for religious insight. Others contend that physical enactment and sensual engagement were genuine components, intentionally blurring lines between spiritual, social, and sexual experience. The fragmentary nature of surviving texts makes definitive conclusions impossible, leaving room for multiple interpretations of both intent and effect. As the ceremony reaches its peak, incense smoke thickens, and the participants' movements become more fluid, almost trance-like. The priest in the bull mask steps toward a central altar, raising his hands in invocation. The priestesses respond, their voices rising in soft harmony. A subtle shift occurs in the circle, as if the air itself is charged with the presence of unseen forces. Participants clutch their tablets tighter, their breathing synchronized, eyes half closed in concentration. You feel a wave of vertigo, as if the boundary between observer and participant is dissolving. A small boy, presumably an apprentice, enters the courtyard quietly, carrying a bowl of perfumed oil. He offers it to the priest, who anoints himself and gestures for the circle to continue. The symbolic motion feels almost erotic yet entirely ritualized, a controlled display of power, devotion, and submission. Watching you understand that Babylonian ceremonies like this were designed to reinforce social hierarchies, maintain cosmic order, and guide personal behavior, all while immersing participants in sensory experiences that leave lasting impressions on body and mind. Finally, the ritual concludes. The priest removes the bull mask, bowing low. While the priestesses step back, their gestures easing into calm, participants place their tablets back on the altar and lower their heads in silent reverence. The courtyard falls quiet, save for the faint ripple of water and the distant hum of the river. You step back into the alley, heart pounding, senses overstimulated, carrying a growing awareness of the subtle, pervasive ways Babylon entwines desire, control, and devotion. By the time you leave the courtyard, Babylon feels like a living, breathing organism pulsating with its own agenda. The streets, now dim under lantern light, hum with soft murmurs, footsteps, and the occasional clatter of a cart's wheels. Somewhere a flute squeals, a high, plaintive note, and a woman laughs in response, as if the sound itself is a form of ritual. The city wraps around you, pressing close, with a mixture of warmth, tension, and quiet menace. You realise you've been moving through the same streets all day, yet nothing looks familiar, and every corner feels like it hides a secret. In Babylon, even space itself conspires to disorient you. Drawn forward, you approach a temple tucked into a narrow alley, its doors slightly ajar. From within comes the faint sound of chanting, low and hypnotic, punctuated by soft percussion. You step closer and see a circle of figures, kneeling and swaying in time with the music. At the centre, a priestess in a gold-trimmed robe holds a small bowl of water, performing a nighttime fertility ritual intended to invite divine blessing on couples throughout the city. Candles flicker, casting shadows that seem to twist independently, creating shapes that look like eyes or serpents on the walls. The air is thick with jasmine, oil, and something sharper you can't identify, a tang that makes your chest tighten. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian night rituals often involved invoking the protection or favour of Ishtar, particularly in relation to fertility, marriage, or erotic energy. Priests and priestesses performed ceremonies with oils, water, incense, and clay figurines, using prescribed gestures and incantations. These rituals were believed to channel divine power into everyday life, influencing luck, desire, and social stability. Participation was sometimes limited to temple initiates, but many ceremonies involved observational, indirect participation from citizens. Quirky fact, some night rituals included the use of animal masks or carved figurines to represent spirits like Lilitu or erotic forces. The masks served not only symbolic purposes, but also helped participants dissociate from mundane identity, embodying divine or supernatural energy for the duration of the ceremony. In some cases, the masks were worn by children or young apprentices under close supervision, introducing them early to the interplay of ritual, observation, and power. As you crouch behind a curtain, observing quietly, a young man and woman enter the circle. The priestess blesses them with water, murmuring softly. They kneel, hands together, and their breathing synchronizes with the rhythm of the chants. The ceremony is strangely intimate but strictly codified. Every gesture, glance, and breath carries layered meaning. You are both captivated and unsettled. This is not voyeurism exactly. It is witnessing a performance of devotion, desire, and divine alignment, all wrapped into one tightly controlled ritual. Here's a scholarly debate. Historians are divided over the extent to which Babylonian fertility rituals were literal versus symbolic. Some argue that sexualized acts were enacted physically, especially for high-ranking participants, to embody the union of gods and mortals. Others suggest that the acts were primarily symbolic, performed through gestures, offerings, or figurines, serving to reinforce societal norms and religious doctrine. Evidence is fragmentary, leaving room for multiple interpretations. As the ritual reaches its zenith, incense smoke thickens, creating a near hallucinatory haze. The priestess dips her fingers into the water, tracing intricate patterns over the hands and foreheads of the kneeling couple. Soft whispers circulate through the circle, words that are both prayer and command, spiritual guidance and subtle manipulation. You watch the young man and woman respond, their expressions a mixture of reverence, tension, and surrender. Even as an observer, you feel the weight of participation pressing against your senses, an almost physical reminder that in Babylon, ritual, sexuality, and power are inseparable. The ceremony concludes with a gentle chime from a bronze bell. Participants bow, return their figurines to the altar, and step away with careful grace. You exhale slowly, stepping back into the alley, heart pounding, mind racing. The night outside feels different now, quieter, yet no less intense. Every shadow, every flicker of lantern light seems charged with meaning. Babylon is still alive, watching and shaping those who dare to witness. You tuck yourself into the darkened street, aware that the city's lessons are cumulative. Curiosity carries weight, observation carries risk, and in Babylon everything, desire, fear, devotion, is a form of currency. You wander farther into the heart of the city as the night deepens, each step echoing against the mud brick walls. Lanterns flicker along the narrow streets, casting long shadows that stretch and twist like living things. The scent of roasted meat and sweet oil mingles with the faint tang of the river, and you can hear distant drums vibrating through the ground. Even in the quietest alleys, the city pulses with life, ritual, and unseen tension. Babylon feels alive in a way that is almost predatory, aware of your presence, your curiosity, your fear. Every movement carries consequences, every gaze is measured, every whisper might ripple outward in unforeseen ways. Your attention is drawn to a small courtyard where a group has gathered near a low altar. A priest in dark robes moves gracefully among the participants, holding a small bronze vessel that glints in the torchlight. The crowd kneels reverently, eyes lowered, as he begins to chant in a deep, rhythmic tone. You realize you have stumbled upon a love spell ritual, designed to bind partners, provoke desire, or influence dreams. The participants carry small clay tablets, amulets, or symbolic figurines, which they present at intervals to the priest. His hands hover over each offering, tracing patterns in the air as if weaving invisible threads between objects, participants, and divine forces. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian love magic was a well-documented practice performed by both temple priests and lay practitioners. Tablets, charms, and incantations were carefully inscribed with names, symbols, and prayers to invoke the favour of gods like Ishtar or to manipulate the affections of others. Magic and ritual were intertwined with social structure, morality, and even legal concerns, making spells a serious matter rather than mere superstition. A quirky detail. Some love charms involved very specific instructions, such as placing a tablet beneath a pillow, tying it with coloured threads, or combining it with oils and perfumes to intensify its effect. One tablet you notice describes a method to make someone dream exclusively of a desired partner for 7 nights. A combination of careful incantation and symbolic representation. You shiver slightly at the thought of these miniature instructions for obsession being taken seriously for centuries. As you observe, a young couple steps forward, offering a pair of clay figurines representing themselves. The priest examines them carefully, murmuring prayers, then dips his fingers into a small basin of water, anointing the figurines with oil. The participants mirror his movements, pressing their own hands against the clay. The ritual is surprisingly intimate without being explicit, a physical enactment of desire, consent, and divine mediation. You notice subtle gestures, a shared glance, a slight breath held at the right moment, the precision of synchronized movement. Every detail matters. Here's a scholarly debate. Some researchers argue that Babylonian love magic relied heavily on psychological suggestion, symbol, and ritualized observation rather than physical acts. Others contend that these rituals could involve eroticized behavior or physical contact between participants to achieve symbolic embodiment of desire. The evidence is fragmentary, leaving room for interpretation, speculation, and a fair degree of horror on the part of unwitting witnesses like yourself. The priest completes the ritual by handing each participant a small inscribed tablet to take home, a tangible link to the god's blessing. The courtyard hums with a soft, residual energy, as if the very air carries the weight of intention, desire, and spiritual authority. You step back, feeling the pull of curiosity and trepidation, and realize that witnessing even a single ceremony in Babylon alters your perception of relationships, power, and divine oversight. The city has a way of embedding itself in your senses, leaving faint traces in the way you breathe, walk, and think. As you leave the courtyard, the streets feel darker, quieter, yet somehow more alive. Every alley seems to hold a secret, every shadow a story, every whisper a command. Babylon thrives on observation and participation, and even as a passive witness, you are implicated. The echo of the drums, the faint perfume of incense, and the soft glow of lanterns cling to your senses, reminding you that nothing here is ever accidental. You clutch your robe tighter, aware that curiosity in Babylon is both a guide and a hazard, and the lessons of desire, ritual, and obedience are accumulating with every step you take. The next morning you wake to the soft murmur of the river and the distant clang of temple bells. The city is already stirring, merchants calling out their wares, children chasing each other along dusty streets, and the faint scent of roasted grains drifting through the air. You rub your eyes, feeling the weight of yesterday's encounters pressing down on you. Babylon doesn't forgive or forget, but the city hums as if nothing has happened, and you realize that survival here is as much about mental endurance as it is about physical agility. Drawn once again toward the temple district, you notice a procession forming along the main avenue. A priest in crimson robes leads a group of masked participants. Their heads adorned with stylized horns and feathers. The masks hide their identities but amplify the sense of ritual authority. You step closer, trying to remain inconspicuous, and discover that the procession is preparing for a public erotic ritual designed to honor Ishtar and invoke fertility and protection over the city. Even from a distance, you can sense the intensity of focus, the careful choreography, the precision of gestures, the measured cadence of their steps. Here's your historical fact. Public rituals in Babylon often combined erotic symbolism with civic and religious objectives. During festivals such as Akitu or Ishtar's seasonal celebrations, participants enacted rituals that sometimes involved intimate gestures or symbolic unions to reinforce social hierarchies, divine favour, and communal prosperity. These ceremonies were formalised and codified, with every movement, object, and utterance carrying significant meaning. A quirky detail: some participants carried small clay dolls representing themselves or deities, which were manipulated during the ritual to symbolise the transfer of energy, blessings, or desires. In certain cases, observers believed that the dolls could influence dreams or fortunes when kept in the household after the ceremony. Essentially, Babylonian society blended tactile symbolism, eroticism, and spiritual authority into tangible objects that bridged human and divine interaction. You watch a masked woman approach the priest, holding a shallow bronze bowl filled with oil. She anoints the hands and foreheads of several participants, each motion deliberate and synchronized with the chanting. The movements are subtle but charged, a combination of devotion and controlled sensuality. The participants' breathing matches the rhythm of the drums, their eyes sometimes closed in focus, sometimes open to witness one another. Even as an outsider, you feel a pull, a mixture of awe, discomfort, and fascination that is almost impossible to disentangle. Here's a scholarly debate. Some historians argue that erotic public rituals were primarily symbolic, emphasizing community cohesion, divine favor, and social order rather than sexual gratification. Others contend that the rituals incorporated actual intimate acts between participants or symbolic enactments that allowed for controlled expressions of desire, blending devotion, societal structure, and erotic energy into a unified practice. Surviving texts offer only fragmentary evidence, leaving room for interpretation and conjecture. The ritual reaches its apex as the priest raises a clay figurine above his head, chanting words that resonate through the courtyard. Participants bow low, hands still intertwined with their dolls, their bodies and minds aligned with the rhythm of the ceremony. The air is thick with incense and the charged energy of focused attention. You notice that every observer, even those on the edges, absorbs some of this energy, a subtle but unmistakable influence on thought, posture, and mood. Babylon teaches that no witness is truly neutral. As the ceremony concludes, the participants replace their figurines on the altar and lower their heads in silent reverence. The courtyard slowly empties, leaving behind only the faint shimmer of oil, the scent of incense, and this residual echo of the chants. You step back into the streets, heart racing, senses saturated, acutely aware that the city never stops observing, never stops orchestrating, and never lets its lessons go unlearned. Babylon has a rhythm, and it now courses through you, leaving an indelible mark on thought, memory, and perhaps something deeper that you cannot name. As evening descends, the streets of Babylon shimmer with the golden glow of lanterns, the city's mud brick walls reflecting flickering light like molten honey. The hum of the Euphrates grows louder in the quiet moments between temple bells, carrying whispers from one end of the city to the other. You move cautiously through narrow alleys, the air heavy with the scent of roasted grain, oil, and faint traces of incense. Even in this subdued hour, Babylon breathes and watches, its pulse felt beneath the soles of your sandals in the subtle rise and fall of the air around you. Every shadow seems alive, every flicker of flame a potential messenger of divine intent. Drawn by the soft thrum of flutes, you find a small courtyard tucked behind an unassuming temple. Inside, a group of young women and men kneels around a low marble altar. The priest leading them is clad in a lion mask, gold-plated and gleaming in the torchlight. He raises his hands, murmuring a chant, and the participants respond, swaying gently, hands tracing intricate patterns over clay tablets laid before them. This is a nighttime erotic offering, a ritual designed to channel divine energy into fertility, prosperity, and social harmony. Every gesture, every breath, every glance carries layered meaning. Here's your historical fact. Erotic offerings were integral to Babylonian religious practice, particularly in the worship of Ishtar, goddess of love, fertility, and war. Rituals involved symbolic acts of intimacy, often mediated by priests or priestesses, to transfer blessings and divine favour. Clay figurines, oil, water, and incense were used as conduits, linking the physical and spiritual worlds. Participation was codified and recorded, ensuring that the rituals reinforced both spiritual beliefs and social order. A quirky detail, some of the clay figurines used in these rituals were intentionally exaggerated, emphasizing body parts associated with fertility or virility. These figurines were often inscribed with the names of participants or the intended recipients of divine favor. In some cases, the figurines were kept in households afterward, acting as protective charms or spiritual talismans, tiny portable reminders of the god's attention to desire, health, and prosperity. You watch as the priest moves among the participants, dipping fingers into oil and tracing intricate patterns on hands and foreheads. Each motion is deliberate, synchronized with the rhythm of the accompanying music. The participants' breathing matches the cadence of drums, their eyes half closed, faces serene yet tense with concentration. Even as a spectator, you feel the ritual's weight, the way intention, touch, and gesture intertwine to create a tangible connection between human and divine. Babylonian rituals are never merely symbolic. They are immersive, demanding attention, obedience, and subtle surrender. Here's the scholarly debate. Historians disagree about the role of erotic elements in Babylonian rituals. Some argue they were symbolic, intended to convey spiritual alignment and social cohesion. Others maintain that certain ceremonies incorporated actual intimate or sexualized behaviors, serving both to channel energy and reinforce hierarchical power structures. Fragmentary evidence leaves room for both interpretations, a blend of the spiritual, social, and corporeal. As the ritual concludes, the participants place their clay figurines on the altar, bow low, and recite prayers under their breath. The lion-masked priest steps back, lowering his hands in silent command, and the courtyard falls into a hushed reverence. You step away, heart racing, senses flooded, acutely aware of Babylon's omnipresent rhythm. Every act you've observed, every sound and scent has become part of the city's current, pulling you deeper into its intricate, often disturbing patterns. You walk into the alleyway carrying the memory of gestures, chants, and faint traces of oil, understanding that in Babylon, even observation is participation. Night deepens and the city of Babylon hums with the quiet insistence of its ancient rhythm. Lanterns flicker along the streets, casting long shadows that stretch and twist across the cracked mud brick walls. The air is thick with the scent of roasted lamb, burning incense, and the subtle tang of river water. Even in this dim hour, the city pulses with life, ritual, and unseen observation. Every step you take is measured, every glance weighed, every whispered thought potentially noted by invisible eyes. Curiosity here is both a compass and a trap. You are drawn toward a smaller temple tucked into a narrow alley, one you've passed before but never entered. Its doors are open, and a faint melody of flutes and drums wafts out, luring you closer. Inside, a group of priests and priestesses kneels around a shallow basin, chanting in low, synchronized tones. A man and a woman stand at the center, holding small clay figurines in their hands. This is a ritual of erotic healing and fertility, intended to cleanse, bless, and restore alignment between human desire and divine order. The participants move with precision, tracing patterns in the water and performing gestures that feel at once intimate and sacred. Even as an observer, the energy presses against you. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian erotic healing rituals often combined symbolic touch, prayer, and divination to address issues ranging from infertility to relationship strife. Priests and priestesses acted as mediators between humans and gods, guiding participants through gestures, chants, and symbolic acts that were believed to channel divine energy. Clay figurines, oils, and water were tools for both spiritual communication and psychological influence, bridging the material and metaphysical worlds. A quirky detail, some rituals involved observation of minor bodily reactions, breath, pulse, blush, to determine the effectiveness of blessings or the presence of divine influence. In certain ceremonies, participants would use masks or amulets to heighten symbolic significance, transforming themselves into vessels for gods, spirits, or mystical forces. Children and apprentices occasionally participated, learning the delicate interplay between ritual, observation, and power from a very young age. You watch as the priestess dips her fingers in oil and gently anoints the participants' foreheads and hands, murmuring incantations under her breath. The young couple mirrors her gestures, pressing their figurines into the water in time with the rhythm of drums. The act is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet charged with significance. Each movement carries layered meaning, connecting the participants' bodies, minds, and spirits to divine patterns. Babylon's rituals rely on precision, intent, and attention to detail, turning even the smallest gestures into instruments of cosmic influence. Here's the scholarly debate. Some historians argue that erotic elements were largely symbolic, representing divine human alignment and reinforcing social hierarchies. Others contend that actual physical engagement or sexualized symbolism played a role, particularly in temple rites associated with Ishtar. Surviving texts are fragmentary, leaving room for interpretation and suggesting that ritual, spirituality and eroticism were deeply intertwined in Babylonian life. The ritual reaches its peak as the priest raises a clay tablet above the basin, inscribed with sacred symbols and the names of participants. A soft glow from nearby lanterns reflects off the water, casting moving shapes on the walls. The participants bow low, eyes closed and murmuring prayers as the priestess traces final patterns in the water. You step back, heart racing, senses overwhelmed by sound, scent and motion. The city feels alive, watching, shaping, and recording your every thought. Babylon is not merely a city, it is a living system of belief, ritual, and power, and even the faintest curiosity marks you as part of its network. You leave the temple, stepping into the quiet alleys. The lanterns flicker softly, the river hums in the distance, and somewhere the faint beat of drums continues. You realize that survival here depends not only on physical endurance, but on understanding the layers of observation, obedience, and desire that underlie every ritual, every glance, every whispered prayer. Babylon shapes those who witness it, leaving traces in body, mind, and spirit. As the city drifts deeper into night, you find yourself wandering toward the ziggurat once more, drawn by the faint vibration of drums and the soft glow of torches reflecting off its steep steps. The air is heavy with smoke and incense, but beneath it is another, subtler scent. Sweet oils, perfumed with hints of jasmine and honey, interwoven with the faint tang of fear. Babylon at night has a rhythm all its own, a pulse that both entrances and disorients, coaxing you forward, urging you to see what perhaps should remain hidden. The ziggurat looms over the plaza, massive and imposing, a concrete reminder of divine oversight and the inescapable weight of ritual. Through the wide steps and open arches, you see a group of masked participants assembling. Some wear the heads of lions, bulls or owls. Others don long robes trimmed with gold. At the centre stands a priestess holding a small bronze bowl of oil, moving gracefully and deliberately among the figures as they kneel and bow in unison. This is a masked fertility rite, a ritual of symbolic eroticism intended to channel divine energy into the city, blessing its citizens and ensuring the continuity of both families and the state. The precision of movement, the interplay of masks, and the deliberate timing of gestures create an almost hypnotic spectacle that draws your attention entirely. Here's your historical fact. Masked fertility rites were common in Babylonian religious practice, especially during seasonal festivals or citywide celebrations. Participants wore animal or deity masks to embody divine or supernatural forces, while the priest or priestess orchestrated the ceremony using oil, water, incantations, and clay figurines. These rituals were codified, with each movement and gesture carrying symbolic meaning, intended to promote fertility, prosperity, and social cohesion. A quirky detail, some masks were designed with exaggerated features to amplify spiritual potency. Owl masks, for example, represented Lilitu, and were used to invoke dreams, fertility, or protection against nocturnal spirits. Lions symbolized strength and dominance, while bulls were associated with virility and endurance. Wearing these masks allowed participants to temporarily embody these divine qualities, blending theatre, spirituality, and societal expectation into a single performance. You watch as the priestess dips her fingers into the oil, tracing intricate patterns across participants' foreheads and hands. The masked dancers mirror her movements, their bodies swaying in a controlled rhythm that aligns perfectly with the accompanying flutes and drums. Each gesture is layered with significance, devotional, symbolic, and erotic, all simultaneously. Even standing on the periphery, you feel the pressure of intention, the almost tactile sense of the ritual's potency, as if the very air vibrates with unseen energy. Here's a scholarly debate. Historians differ on the role of eroticized symbolism in these rites. Some argue it was largely metaphorical, emphasizing divine human connection and reinforcing social structures. Others assert that participants may have engaged in subtle eroticized behaviors or physical enactments to embody fertility and cosmic balance. Fragmentary textual and archaeological evidence leaves space for multiple interpretations, blending observation, ritual, and spiritual immersion. The ceremony reaches its apex when the priestess raises a clay figurine high above the altar, chanting words that resonate through the plaza. Participants bow low, their hands clutching their own figurines or amulets, eyes half closed, fully immersed. The flicker of torches casts moving shapes on the walls, animating shadows into creatures of both reverence and subtle menace. You step back, aware of the intensity of the moment, sensing that even as a mere observer, you are marked by the city's ritualized attention. Babylon does not let its witnesses leave unchanged. Finally, the masked participants lower their heads, and the priestess gently places the clay figurines back on the altar. The plaza falls silent, save for the distant murmur of the river and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. You exhale, heart racing, body tense, and step back into the streets. The city seems to breathe around you, alive with unseen power, ancient devotion, and the persistent intertwining of desire, ritual, and authority. Babylon has left its mark again. A whisper on your skin, a shadow on your mind. The following dawn rises hazy and gold over Babylon, spilling light across the mud-brick rooftops and the winding alleys that seem to shift subtly with every glance. The river glitters faintly, reflecting the soft movements of boats laden with grain, pottery, and bundles of reeds. Even in this early hour, the air hums with the city's hidden rhythm, the interplay of commerce, ritual, and observation that you've come to know all too intimately. Each step you take seems measured, every shadow potentially alive, every flicker of light a reminder that Babylon watches, remembers, and expects. You walk cautiously, acutely aware of the city's pervasive presence. Drawn once again toward the temple district, you notice a procession forming along the wide avenue. Participants wear robes of crimson, gold, and deep blue, masks glinting in the early sunlight. A priestess leads them, carrying a small bronze bowl of oil, while attendants trace intricate patterns in the dust and chant low, hypnotic prayers. This is a morning purification ritual, designed to cleanse the body, mind, and spirit before the day's festivals or ceremonies. Even standing at the edge, you can feel the ritual's potency, the controlled movements, the rhythmic cadence, the blending of symbolic gestures with subtle erotic undertones, all orchestrated to align the city's inhabitants with divine order. Here's your historical fact. Purification rituals were central to Babylonian religious practice, intended to cleanse both physical and spiritual impurities. Temple priests and priestesses conducted these ceremonies using oil, water, incense, and symbolic objects like clay figurines. Such rituals reinforced the connection between mortals and gods, ensuring the community's prosperity, social harmony, and adherence to spiritual law. These practices often accompanied fertility rites, divination, and seasonal festivals. A quirky detail, some purification ceremonies involved temporary role reversals, where participants would wear masks representing animals or supernatural entities. These acts were believed to channel divine energy, subvert ordinary hierarchies, and create temporary liminal spaces in which both participants and observers could experience altered states of consciousness. Observing or participating in these liminal moments could leave a subtle, lasting imprint on the body and mind. You watch as a young couple steps forward, presenting small clay figurines to the priestess. She dips her fingers in the oil and traces patterns across their foreheads and hands, murmuring incantations that ripple through the courtyard. The participants mirror her movements, pressing their figurines into the shallow basin of water, their breaths synchronized with the rhythm of the chant. The ritual is meticulous, intimate, and immersive. Every motion carries symbolic weight, blending spiritual, social, and erotic dimensions into a single cohesive performance. Here's a scholarly debate. Historians question whether these rituals were primarily symbolic or incorporated actual intimate behaviours. Some argue that gestures, touch, and figurine manipulation were enough to satisfy ritual requirements, emphasizing spiritual and social alignment. Others suggest that certain practices may have included subtle physical enactments. Blurring the line between devotion and erotic expression, evidence is incomplete, leaving room for interpretation and scholarly disagreement. The ritual concludes with the priestess placing the clay figurines back on the altar and bowing, signalling the end of the ceremony. The participants step back, breathing softly, returning their attention to the surrounding temple precinct. You step away, heart racing, mind saturated with the intensity of the morning's events. The city hums quietly around you, alive with unseen forces, hidden observation, and the persistent weight of ritualized power. Babylon teaches, always, that curiosity is both necessary and dangerous, and that survival depends on learning its rhythms, obeying its subtle rules, and navigating its intertwining webs of desire, fear, and devotion. By midday, the sun beats down on Babylon with relentless intensity, turning the streets to gold and dust, casting long, wavering shadows that stretch across the walls like silent witnesses. The hum of the Euphrates carries faint echoes of yesterday's chants, prayers, and the soft scraping of clay styluses. You wander through the market, passing carts piled with figs, pottery, and small charms of Ishtar, their delicate forms glinting in the sunlight. Even the most mundane corners of the city carry a hint of ritual, a trace of devotion, and an invisible scrutiny that makes you acutely aware of every movement, every glance. Babylon doesn't just exist, it observes. Drawn again to the temple district, you find yourself standing before a small courtyard where a priestess orchestrates a fertility and purification ritual. A pair of masked participants kneels on woven mats, holding clay figurines and amulets, their movements slow, deliberate, and synchronized with the chant of the attending priests. Oil glistens on their hands as the priestess traces precise patterns across their foreheads, murmuring invocations to Ishtar and Marduk. The air is heavy with incense, mingling with the earthy aroma of clay and perfumed oils. Even from the edges, the energy of the ritual presses against you, tangible and insistent, a reminder of the city's pervasive power. Here's your historical fact. Babylonian fertility and purification rituals were codified and performed to ensure social and cosmic harmony. Priests and priestesses mediated between humans and gods, guiding participants in gestures, prayers, and symbolic acts designed to channel divine favor. These ceremonies often intertwined erotic symbolism, spiritual devotion, and communal oversight, reinforcing social hierarchies while maintaining religious observance. Participation, observation, and ritual record-keeping all contributed to Babylon's complex system of governance and belief. A quirky detail. In some ceremonies, small clay figurines were intentionally exaggerated in size or shape to symbolize fertility, vitality, or spiritual potency. Masks, amulets, and oil were used to transform participants into temporary vessels of divine energy. Even children or apprentices might witness or perform simplified versions, internalizing lessons of power, ritual, and observation from a young age. Babylonian ritual was immersive, layered, and meticulously symbolic. As the priestess dips her fingers in oil and touches the participants' foreheads, murmuring invocations, the participants mirror her gestures with their figurines, pressing them gently into a basin of water. The synchronized movements, combined with the rhythm of chanting, produce a subtle hypnotic effect, aligning attention, intention, and energy. Even as an observer, you feel the ceremony's power, the way Babylon converts devotion into physical and emotional presence. The city's rituals are not just acts, they are experiences that bind, instruct, and mark every participant. Here's a scholarly debate. Some historians argue these rituals were primarily symbolic, emphasizing divine human alignment and reinforcing social norms. Others suggest that subtle erotic or intimate enactments may have been intentionally incorporated to embody fertility, devotion, or cosmic balance. Fragmentary textual evidence leaves interpretation open, highlighting the complexity of Babylonian ritual practice and the blurred boundaries between the spiritual, the social, and the corporeal. The ritual concludes as the priestess lowers her hands and returns the clay figurines to the altar. Participants bow and step back, silent and reverent. You leave the courtyard feeling the lingering intensity of the ceremony pressing in, your mind alive with observation, memory and awe. The streets of Babylon bustle with activity, merchants calling, children playing, the river murmuring. The city breathes around you, powerful, pervasive and inescapable. You realize that your journey has taught you more than survival. It has shown the ways belief, fear, desire and devotion intertwine to shape an entire civilization. As the sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long amber shadows across Babylon's streets, you finally pause. The city hums around you, the distant clatter of carts, the soft murmur of merchants closing their stalls, children laughing as they chase one another through alleys thick with the scent of baked bread and incense. For weeks you have wandered through its temples, witnessed its rituals and absorbed its strange blend of devotion, power and erotic symbolism. Every street, every shadowed corner, every whisper of wind has carried a lesson. In Babylon nothing is simple, nothing is accidental, and every action, observed or private, ripples outward into unseen networks of control and belief. You think back on what you've seen, the one-coin rule, the sacred unions, the masked fertility rites, the divinations in oil and liver, the erotic ceremonies that blurred the line between devotion and desire. The city's people, priests, priestesses, eunuchs, merchants, children, have moved through it with astonishing purpose, performing their roles with precision and belief that is simultaneously terrifying and beautiful. Babylon is a place where curiosity is both a gift and a hazard, and you have carried it like a small, dangerous flame through every alley and courtyard. The city has left its mark on you, subtle yet persistent, shaping the way you walk, breathe and think. You pause by the Euphrates, its waters catching the last light of day, shimmering like fractured gold. Somewhere upstream, a priest's chant drifts across the water, mingling with the hum of the city, carrying the echo of rituals, prayers and offerings. You realize that Babylon's power lies not only in its temples or rulers, but in its ability to weave the spiritual, erotic and social into an inseparable tapestry. Every glance, every touch, every whispered prayer reinforces the invisible architecture of control, devotion, and desire that binds the city together. It is as elegant as it is oppressive, and as incomprehensible as it is mesmerizing. A soft wind carries the faint scent of oil, jasmine, and earth, reminding you of Ashratam's stall, the clay tablets, and the tiny amulets you glimpsed there. The city in all its complexity, has taught you that human behavior, belief and desire are instruments of survival and social cohesion. Babylon is a living lesson in the power of ritual, the malleability of morality, and the strange ways in which fear and devotion intertwine. It is a place where curiosity is tested, where observation carries weight, and where even the smallest act can become part of the divine narrative. As night fully descends, you let yourself sit by the riverbank, watching lanterns flicker across the water, the ziggurat looming in silhouette against the dark sky. For the first time you feel a faint sense of closure, knowing you have witnessed both the grandeur and the horror of Babylonian life. You have seen devotion that inspires, fear that binds, desire that controls, and rituals that blur every boundary between sacred and profane. And in the quiet of the evening, with the city's pulse vibrating beneath you, you understand that survival here is not merely physical, it is about observation, understanding, and acceptance of a world whose rules are strange, intricate, and relentless. Finally you rise, dust off your tunic, and let the gentle hum of the river and the city carry you forward. Babylon has imparted its lessons, leaving traces in your mind and body, impressions that will linger far longer than any street or temple you walked through. You carry with you the rhythm of its rituals, the weight of its beliefs, and the memory of its people, alive, complex, and unflinching. And as you walk into the night, the lanterns reflecting like fire in the water, you realize that Babylon has not just been a place you visited, it has become a part of you, its pulse now entwined with your own.